Hello. Happy Friday. Let me know if I'm lagging. I was having issues with lagging just a second ago. But hello. Welcome back. Hello. It is Friday, July 3rd, 2026. Tomorrow is 4th of July. Happy 4th of July to everyone. I will be live if you are not doing much, then come hang out. Okay, cool. Thanks. Let's see. We're back to covering Kenzie. I knew I took a break because um we we're covering the Kenzie transcripts from the juvenile court, and then I did a members only, and then I didn't go live. So I've been MIA. But the only reason why I was MIA is because we're gonna get ready to talk about other cases as well. We're still continuing Kenzie. We're going to finish the transcripts for this juvenile hearing and then go into the regular trial. So hopefully we can get to that soon. Shout out to everyone that made it to the members only. Hello, hello. Let me see who's here. I see Evie. Shout out to the mods. I think I made myself pretty clear in the members only about just respecting one another in the chat. I know we can get a little too emotional sometimes and argue with each other and whatnot, but let's just talk about the case, have a good time, be respectful, be chill. We can agree to disagree. I know a lot of people don't agree with me, and that's fine. Well, at least in my opinion, you're welcome. You're entitled to your own. And I think I've made that clear, but shout out to all the real ones that are still here. So shout out to the mods. Let's see. Jan, Lindsay Bay, Tennessee, Beautifully Broken, Vicky, Creatively, Lindsay Bay. Okay. A lot of you here. I thought y'all would be partying for 4th of July. Christine, hi love. Is there justice? Boomer. Abuelita. Crystal, hello. Lakeisha. I see some new people I haven't seen in chat before. Meow meow. Hey Jeff. Peach, hello Peach. Where you been? Chelsea, Neat Noodle. The video is a little bit, that's all. Really? Okay, well, let me know if it gets better or worse. Hey Cynthia. Diet Pepsi. Hello, friend. Hey Shay, good to see you. 103 degrees in Jersey right now. Yeah, I'm on a little bit earlier than usual. And well, it's not actually. I've just been going on later. But it's hot as hell here too. Jules, hello. Hey Jojo. Let me see, who else did I miss? Boo Boo. Okay, there's quite a few of you in here. Hello, Diana C. Hello, Cowboy. I was sick last week. Did Melly come forward about what she found on Mackenzie said? I don't know what that means. We're just reviewing documents. I'm ready. And hello, Julio. So before I get started, I saw two of my older supporters who have now stopped being supporters because I changed my opinion, trashing me. And another creator, someone screenshotted me, trashing me in the comments. Something like, oh, my channel's garbage because I changed my opinion. And I'm literally like, don't do that because it makes me really cocky, first of all. Second of all, again, y'all don't have to agree with me. You don't have to follow my opinion. I'm not here to change anyone's mind. We're just reviewing the investigation, reviewing the trial transcripts, and that's it. That's where we're at. So I see you. Okay, let's get started. Let me pull this up. I don't what? No, girl. No trash in the comments. Use your trash barrel. No, what changed my perspective is the investigation and people being involved with the investigation that should have not been involved with the investigation. And some stuff I've seen online. I haven't shared everything yet. Definitely watch Kizzy IRL. She's my girl. She's now on YouTube. She's covering a lot of stuff too on this case. Definitely go watch her and then follow her on TikTok as well. Kizzy IRL. I'm sorry, we all have our own options. Yeah, I'm not forcing you to do anything. Just hang out and have a good time. And I appreciate that. Hey Kate, good to see you. Let's see. Oh my God, your opinions changed because facts came out. That's very normal and quite human. Apparently not. And as much as, RIP Dom and Davion, but let's not try to trash the families, either one of them. I've done that a lot in the past. And so that's why I have came clean to you guys and apologized because I should have never entitled any bullying and just like you shouldn't either, just because I changed my opinion. Um, and you live and you learn, that's just what it is. I had a feeling this had to do with the justice system. Yeah, I think there was one of the hate comments was like, she thinks people paid off whoever. And it's like, no, I think the investigation is shady. I think some of the detectives in there are shady. I think people involved in the case were shady. I don't know what else has been going on. A lot is coming out. Um, but I also wouldn't use degrading names and call any of my viewers or supporters degrading names. So with that being said, doesn't change how I feel about the victims. They should have never passed. We get that. Kenzie is in jail and in prison, and she remains there. So me having a change of opinion about the investigation doesn't mean that I'm obsessed with Kenzie now. That's not the case here. And I'm not being paid off by anyone. I would never. And these are just my opinions, my commentary. You're entitled to your own opinion. My mods respect that. I respect that. And we keep it pretty chill here overall. It's been a little hectic because it's like two worlds colliding, right? Those that feel Kenzie should have got a new trial, which that's what I'm thinking now, and those that don't. And that used to be what I thought. So I get it. I get it. But those of you that stick around, I appreciate it. And we have other creators too that support what I'm saying and just don't talk about it. And that's fine. I don't judge them. I wouldn't want to get the fucking hate for it either or the drama. But I am one that can handle that. So gladly I will be that voice. I think Kenzie deserves a new trial. I think there's a lot of shit in this that we didn't know. We went into this with like the text messages. That's when we got a lot of the babelets who came here. That's when when I really went deep into the case, when we started reading the text messages. And I don't disregard the text messages. I get comments like, do you forget how gross Kenzie was and how you said she was gross? Yeah, I do. I do think they were both toxic. I do think they were both foul to each other, vile to each other, abusive to each other. But it's a two-way street. And so that's where I'm kind of at with all of it, but I understand it. And so we're just reading the trial transcripts. This shouldn't change anything about whether you like me or not, or whether you can be respectful or not. And I'm not talking to anyone here in specific, just everyone in general. Like, that's how it should be. And no one should enable any type of bullying. And I feel like that goes to viewers and creators as well. Like, that's kind of gross. But it's all good. Like, everyone's different. Everyone can handle their channel differently. Let's move on. I'm done with my soapbox speech. I love facts. I knew there was more. Thank you, Millie. Thank you, Tracy, for being here. And thank you, Juvenated Creations, for becoming a member and supporting. EDR can be debunked, says Jeff. Does that mean a new bench trial or jury? I would say maybe jury. Away for the 4th, but listening. Melly, respect the channel. It's all about getting down to truth as much as possible. The kid is where she's supposed to be, and that's your opinion, right? We all view things differently, whether it's religion, sex, raising children, spending money, doing drugs, true crime, politics. Are you blue or are you red? I mean, we don't talk politics, but like it's where we have differing opinions and everything. Not one of us is going to always agree with each other, every single topic, every single case, every single thing. She could potentially get a harsher, yeah, you know what? And that's up to her, essentially, right? If whatever happens and she goes to habeas corpus, I don't know, that would be her decision if she's willing to accept that, the punishment, the consequences, the sentence that would come if it's differing and whatnot. They were good at just showing Kenzie and her social media, trying to make her look like a bad enough person would do such a thing. Yeah, there's a lot going on. A lot. We do know that Dom was being investigated, or someone was being investigated prior to the crash. That has been verified through public documents. So there's a lot going on. And why I have my opinion, and that's just my opinion. Let's get started. We left off on the redirect examination of Mark Sargent by Mr. Troop, prosecutor Tim Troop. So Mark Sargent is a fire and explosion consultant. I know it's been like 2 days, so we're gonna kind of have to jump back into it. She's where she belongs, but she deserves a fair trial and a proper conviction. No insane, she's innocent, just not guilty of what she was convicted of. My opinion is changing. She may have been overcharged. However, I believe she needs to do time respectfully. And she is doing time. I think there's some mental health issues here that should be addressed and that were ignored. And the more I'm getting into things, the more I'm feeling like, okay, this is bad. Like, this is bad. There was a lot of stuff going on. But, you know, I haven't seen the Shirillas bash me. So let that speak for itself too, right? The horrible people that we thought they were or think they are. Let's just remember that. Question. You testified that the Toyota has safety systems that are designed to deal with pedal misapplication, didn't you? Sergeant responds with, that's correct. If the brake and accelerator are applied at the same time, correct. Oh, wait, sorry, my mouse skipped. In this case, no brake was applied. Troop says, okay, and all this talk about left, right, left, things like this, how does the fact that the accelerator was still at 100% affect the analysis? Sergeant says, if this was human interaction, the accelerator, of course, wasn't released. So the left, right, left, how can I put this? Appeared to be through human interaction, not through computer analysis. If someone were trying to regain control of a vehicle, I would expect them to release the applicator and step on the brake. Troop says, okay, you were showed Exhibit 10. I'm going to ask you to look at page 7 of Exhibit 10. The highlighted portion where it said that the right-hand turn was 148 degrees. Is that accurate? Sergeant says, I believe the right-hand turn was at 142.5. Troop says, 142.5. Thank you. Sergeant says, yes. Troop says, I have no further question. The court says, anything else, Mr. McDonald? Mr. McDonald says, no, Your Honor. The court says, thank you so much for being here. The witness says, thank you. You may step down. Okay. Troop says, I do have another witness. They take a little break, little recess. We're back on the record. Okay. Who's the next witness? Troop calls Detective Zaki Hazu. So Zaki Hazu is someone that I think needs to be looked into. I think he is somewhat shady. Detective Hazu is very familiar with the Russos and a lot of the incidents that happened at their house prior to the crash and in the past. And I have a problem with that. I do. I think it's a conflict of interest. And if it was your child, my child, or if it was you, you would want the same thing. You would want a legitimate team who doesn't know each other and who's not corrupt in any way. I'm reading the comments. And I think that he made some mistakes. I do. Intriguing. Yep, I agree. It's weird. Yeah. Detective Hazu's coming up in a lot of reports about domestic violence incidents at Dom's mother's house. And he's very familiar with them. So I do have a problem with that. But you don't have to. That's just my opinion. The witness says, good morning, Your Honor. The court says, good morning. Please raise your right hand. Detective Zaki Hazu, sworn or affirmed. Okay, direct examination by Tim Troop. Good morning, Detective. And that goes for Troop as well and Glover, the DEA agent. Why there was a DEA agent in a crash, I had no idea until I started looking into everything, because there was a drug investigation going on. Yes. Yes. Please let the Russo that I'm sorry for their losses, and I pray that Daryl never gets out of prison. May God bless the boy's soul. I'm so sorry. You can't look at it another way than that. I can never judge someone that didn't share my opinion. That's crazy. I wonder just how familiar, because definitely could be a conflict of interest in that little town. I would have a problem with it if that was my case. Glover interviewed the Russo mom. I believe, I don't know if it was the other detective, if it was Zaki Hazu. Jeff might know. Why did no one talk to Rosie's friend that was there that night? What was her name again? Oh, Nina. It was Nina and her boyfriend. Um, you know, okay, this is might be something we talked about on a later live, but I have something to say about the Rosie thing and the Netflix that she said in Netflix that I view way differently. But we might do that on a members only or on another one. We're not reading the transcripts. We do need to do a little update. Troop says, please introduce yourself to the court and spell your name for the record. Okay, Zaki Hazu, what are you employed? He says, I am currently employed with Strongsville Police Department and I'm a detective. Troop says, please provide a summary of your education, training, experience, and qualifications. He says, I have attended the Ohio State Patrol Basic Police Academy. I hold a bachelor's degree in criminal justice from Kent State, attended Cleveland Marshall College. I have a master's in legal studies and criminal law. I also work part-time for a national company called, and then it says Inaudible. I'm nationally certified through the company as an advanced criminal investigator, instructor, and advanced interview interrogation instructor. I'm a state certified legal instructor in the state of Ohio. And in addition to those, are you the assigned detective to these investigation? Correct. He says that is correct. He says, do you conduct the investigation on your own? He says, no, not in this case. Troop says, how was the investigation conducted in this case? Hazu says, in this case, being a new detective, Your Honor, new detective. Why would they put a new detective on a case like this? Respectfully. Yeah, Galassi seems off to me. He is really involved and Hazu mentions it in his report. Um, yeah, I wonder just how familiar because they're definitely oh yeah, I agree with that. He did to do it. Oh, okay. New detective, Your Honor. I decided to do an investigation by committee, and so I sought assistance with Strongsville Police that compromised of 5 total detectives, a sergeant who has combined, Your Honor, we have 87 years of police experience investigations. I have had a detective sergeant who has had courses and experience in investigating homicides. I had a lieutenant, a detective lieutenant who is experienced in crash reconstruction. He's a reconstructionist himself and a Tech 1, Tech 2, and Tech 3 certified. I had a detective who was an evidence technician state certified, and I had a detective who's a narcotics task force officer. Narcotics task force. Let me tell you, they're definitely not going there and jumping into this investigation for weed and shrooms, respectfully. Um, they didn't have that much. That's not trafficking material, but we know where we have or selling distribution is what I mean. Well, yeah, rug trafficking. We saw this picture, which would imply some type of drug trafficking, and I'm curious where someone would get this much codeine or promethazine because I used to work in big pharma. I was with big corporations, and these are controlled substances, and I have questions. I have questions. I have questions. I have questions why someone would have up to $2,000 worth of lean in their background in this picture that I never saw, and I have dissected everything in this Kenzie case. That is something I would be concerned about. Um, Amongst other things that were going on. But yeah, let's continue. They're definitely not going there for a couple grams of weed, let me tell you that. Um, we are 420 friendly here, and baby, they are not trying to go after you for that weed. That's for sure. uh, Definitely not. Let me take a drink of my balls. That's a pharmacist involved, maybe. Listen, I worked in it. I worked in big pharma, and I have requested promethazine or whatever when I've been sick, and they won't even give it to me. Well, my doctor won't. So there's that. And I'm not a rug user. Um, and I've never really had a problem with it. Never had the liquid formula promethazine, nor have I ever found it fun. Permit. Yeah, they won't for me either. So that's interesting. Question: how did you become involved with this investigation? He says, so officially I was assigned the case, Your Honor, on August 1st, which was Monday morning. I came in as the detective, and the detective sergeant just handed me the case jacket and said, this is yours, look into it. Detective Sergeant, whoever that was, can you please come testify to this? Because I'm curious why he was put onto it. Did you look into it? Yes, I did. Okay, tell us about it. So initially this was reported on the previous day, a Sunday morning, Your Honor. It came in as the way it came to me from patrol as a double fatal motor vehicle crash, which means it was a car crash with at least two fatalities involved. Troop says, let me stop you real quick. You said Sunday morning. Do you recall the date? He says Sunday morning was July 31st of 2022, Your Honor. What city are we talking about? Oh, let me take this picture of Kenzie down. Troop says, we're talking about Strongsville and Cuyahoga County. Okay. Jesus says, and so this is the first kind of assignment that came into me that day. That was the only case that I was assigned. And so we took it from there. A double fatality. It brought my attention that I suspected Schedule 1 drug was found. And so that kind of raised the stakes a little bit. A Schedule 1 drug? That's not the same. Let's look that up. What did he say? A Schedule 1 drug? Maybe the promethazine. I know when you mix it with codeine, it changes for sure. Now, I don't know if that one had codeine or not. I can't see the label. Let's continue. Now, did you go out to the crash site? We'll come back to this. Now, did you go out to the crash site at Progress in Alameda? He says, I did not go out on the site. Okay. Why? I was not called out to the scene of the crash, but Strongsville officers did respond and see the crash, says Troop. He says, yes, patrol did respond and they called out the traffic unit. Troop says, and do Strongsville officers wear body cameras? He says, yes, and dash cameras in their cruisers. Troop says, did you, as part of your investigation, collect any body cam or dash cam video clips? He says, yes, it goes into the city server, and I viewed all of the officers' body cameras and dash cameras. Troop says, okay, will you recognize the body cameras and the dash cameras that you reviewed if I play them for you? Jesus says, I believe so. The court says, 1 second. And you are playing a body camera from the scene? Troop says, I do intend. First, I'm going to play dash camera, Your Honor. And so that should take me maybe 5 or 10 minutes. The court says, and that's officers arriving at the scene. Troop says, it's just officers arriving at the scene. The court says, okay, Mackenzie, they're about to play that. Do you want to go back into the holding cell? Mackenzie says, yes, Your Honor. Thank you. The court says, you can do that. Mackenzie leaves the room. The court says, go ahead. Troop says, showing you first what I've marked as States Exhibit 33. Your Honor, if you could please give me a second. My screen just disappeared. The court says, sure. 1 moment, please, he says. Okay, let's play in the video. We're back on the record. Troop says, Detective, on the screen is Exhibit 33. Do you recognize it? He says, Yes, Mr. Troop. Troop says, What is Exhibit 33? He says, This is a dash camera from the cruiser, the Strongsville police car that was being operated by patrolman Brett Robinson. Troop says, and is this showing the cruiser? Sorry, I'm taking notes as I go. And this is showing the cruiser going down progress. He says, Yes, sir, he is now. Patrolman Robinson is going westbound towards the scene of the crash. Troop says, Could you please tell us what he gets to Lincoln Parma Movers? Oh, let me pull up my StreamYard. Sorry. Hey, Calista Cats. I have promethazine, but not codeine. Scheduled 3. Yeah, that's why I was looking into that. I'm like, does it differ per state? Because I thought it was just a whole worldwide thing. I always got that for crosshair. It tastes like I know they here in Kansas CVS can fill it. It's definitely not like the good old days. I don't know about that. I've got it prescribed. I got pneumonia. Oh yeah, that could be true. Maybe I just never had a diagnosis. Damn, that's a lot. Yeah. It's expensive too. They put it in baby bottles. Why the baby bottle? Oh, because there's like ounces on it on the outside. That's probably why. But yeah, they put it in. It's the stuff Little Wayne used to drink. You know what I'm talking about? Yes, it has many different uses. It tastes like crap. Let's continue. Yeah, well, you can put like candies in it. You can mix it with sodas, like flavored sodas. At least that's what I've seen on social media. I was never much into lean. Can you please tell us when he gets to Lincoln Parma Movers? Jesus says it should be coming up here on the right. The road's going to curve to the right, and right here is where Parma Movers is as he's passing it. Now you can see Alameda, the crash scene. Troop says, okay, that says 1 minute that it took the officer Robinson to get from Pearl Road to Alameda. Would you agree? He says, yes. Troop says, what is the posted speed limit on Progress Drive? He says, it is 35 miles an hour. Troop says, do you know if Officer Robinson was driving 35 miles an hour? He says, I can't say for certain, Your Honor, but here's what I can tell you. The first unit on scene, Officer Galazzi, questions for him too, told units to step it up, to get there quickly. As soon as he walked up on the car and saw what's inside, he immediately called for units. When we say step it up, you're basically just getting there. So I would assume here that Patrol Robinson was going above the posted speed limit to get to Patrol Galassi's location. Mr. McDonald says, we would object to an assumption. Troop says, is Progress Drive a straight street? Jesus says, no, it's not. Troop says, tell us about the nature of Progress Drive. Jesus says, so Progress Drive is a concrete roadway and it is bumpy. Okay. So it is bumpy. There's a video that somebody, well, it's the video of the crash, but there's a new, I'll have to show you guys. It's very strong. Well, two tablespoons laid me out. Really? I just grabbed my old bottle of it. Well, Kate Levinson, you put that in your medicine cabinet. That's why I take mostly daily without codeine. It's just an antihistamine. Yeah, with codeine. It has to have codeine in it. I'm pretty sure to get you the high that they want. That's why they call it lean, because yes, smacks you will get. Yes, full of chuck holes. Yes, it was full of chuck holes. So if she lost control of the vehicle and there was chuck holes, as someone called it, I can't remember who that was. That is interesting. I would say toward maybe half a mile west of Pearl Road, it curves, and on the map, it looks very slight. But when you drive it, it is not. Okay. Question. In Officer Robinson's dash camera, you saw all of the potholes that Mr. McDonald was talking about. Zaki Jesus says, yes, can we replay this, Your Honor? The court says, sure. The witness says, Zaki Jesus says, do you mind if I get close to the screen? The court says, go ahead. Troop says, I'm going to start this again at 0. The court says, just maintain speaking louder. Troop says, I'm going to stop the video when we see the 18 to 25, 8 to 10, what? 18 to 25. There was 25 potholes. What? 18 and 25, 8-inch, 10 to 10-inch potholes. Okay, is that a lot for just that road or no? I don't pour concrete, respectfully, clearly. um, that's a lot, or no? I'm trying to think, like, I don't even see one pothole when I leave my, sounds like a lot. Damn chuckles. Yeah, it's a lot. It is, right? I'm like, I left this morning and I think I came across 0 and I drove about 13 miles. It's an industrial park. Yeah, that's a bumpy road. Thank you, SDOTS. I mean, there's areas of PA you may encounter similar amounts. Really? It's a lot, but it's industrial area, mostly trucks. Okay. Chuckles over chuckles. So 18 to 25. I didn't know the actual number, so that's interesting. See what I'm saying? Sir, you didn't ask me to stop the video. Is this because you didn't see any potholes? Jesus says that is correct. Troop says, now it's fair to say that, would you agree with me that Progress Drive is a concrete slab road? Jesus says, yes, multiple little slabs kind of put together. Troop says, so just bumps? He says, yeah. Troop says, when was the video taken? Jesus says, if you kind of move your mouse, it's about 6:20 in the morning, I would say. It should say, or maybe if you go to the beginning, it should say at the bottom the date and time and the name of the officer. Troop says, okay. Jesus says, and I believe it's 6:20 in the morning on July 31st, 2022. Troop says, and he was on the first responders. You could see from that video. Jesus says, yes. Troop says, you testified that officers also had body cameras on. He says, body cameras on. Jesus says, yes, Strongsville officers did. Troop says, did you also review Officer Robinson's camera? He says, I did. Officer Robinson? Troop says, showing you State's Exhibit 34. Do you recognize this? He says, yes. Troop says, identify it if you would. Jesus says, this is Patrolman Brett Robinson's body camera, and it is on 7/31/2022 at 6:20, and it activates 30 seconds before he arrives at the scene. That's the way the system is synced. That's for the body cam. There's a video playing in the background. Troop says, stopping Exhibit 34 at 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Is that a fair and accurate depiction of the images that Officer Robinson's body camera caught? And then the rest of the sentence is inaudible. Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, beyond the body camera footage, were any photographs taken at the crash site? Jesus says, yes. Troop says, who took the photographs? Jesus says, I believe it was Patrolman Caitlin Smead, and we had a trainee who was going through STO. His name is Matt Zielinski, so it was 1 or 2 of them. Troop says, could I have a moment, Your Honor? The court says, sure. Troop says, have you had an opportunity to review the photographs that were taken? Jesus says, yes. Okay, let's start with State's Exhibit 48. Can you see that from where you're seated? Jesus says, yes. Troop says, what is Exhibit 40A? Jesus says, it looks like a piece of debris laying on a concrete road. Jesus or Troop says, okay, do you know what it is? Jesus says, it's a piece of a sign. Okay, where is it? Jesus says, it is on the roof of the building. Troop says, okay, the first building. Troop says, okay, Jesus says the first building. Troop says exhibit 49. Jesus says that came off that sign. Troop says, okay, but what does exhibit 49? Jesus says, so your honor, right here, what you're looking at is the T intersection. Okay. Close to us is Alameda, which runs north and south. And then facing us, the way out would be eastbound on Progress Drive. And that photo was taken from the roof where that piece of debris was found. Troop says, okay, and you can also see a sign in the picture. Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, entire tracks. Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, this is exhibit 50, which was previously identified by Mark Sargent. Do you recognize that? Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, and identify it for the record, please. Jesus says, this was a slipper, Prada, and it was wedged between the linkage and the gas pedal. Troop says, this is 513, but it was supposed to say exhibit 51. Do you recognize that? Jesus says, yes, this is the EDR, the event data recorder, the black box, so to speak. Troop says, exhibit 52. Jesus says, the same device, sir, the EDR. Troop says, exhibit 53. Jesus says, so your honor, what you're looking at here is a T intersection. But this time we are facing westbound on Progress Drive and looking at Alameda with the crash scene right in front of you. Troop says, and exhibit 53, is it fair to say that you can see tire tracks leading directly towards the sign? Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, exhibit 54. Jesus says, this is a point of impact with the corner of the Plitco building at Alameda. Troop says, 55. Jesus says, different angle, same location. Troop says, piece of the sign on 55 as well. Jesus says, yes, sir. Pieces of the sign, debris from the vehicle. Troop says, and 56. Jesus says, the same. It's the impact. 57. Jesus says, this is a Toyota Camry from the crash scene. And 58. Jesus responds, the same Toyota Camry from the crash scene. Troop says, 59. Jesus says, this is a photo of the vehicle with the first responders as they were attempting to extricate one of the two victims. Troop says, 60. Jesus says, this is a sign, the Plitco sign, and this is facing westbound, your honor. Sorry, I apologize. This is facing eastbound, so we're facing away from the building. Troop says, in 61. Jesus says, same sign. Now we're facing westbound, facing the building. Troop says, 62. Jesus said, this is an overview of the crash scene. However, the significance of this photo lies on if you look at the bottom right corner, your honor, you're going to see a tire track that goes through the grass towards the crash scene. Troop says, what was the sign from the Plitco building? Was the sign from the Plitco building lighted at night? Jesus says, I believe so. Troop says, and 63. Jesus says, this is also a different photo of the scene, but it shows the tire tracks leading up to the location of final rest. Troop says, and 64. Jesus says, this is what the driver's side seat, the front driver's side seat looked like after Miss Mackenzie Shirilla was removed from the vehicle. The site looked like after. Okay. Now in the course of your investigation, did you learn whether or not any of the occupants of the vehicle were seatbelted? Jesus says yes. According to the OH1, the crash report, and you could have seen it in one of the previous photos and scrolled, Miss Shirilla was wearing a seatbelt and the officers had to cut it, but not Mr. Russo, who was in the front seat, and not Mr. Flanagan, who was in the rear seat in the back seat. This is a lie. This is a lie. Why can someone make a mistake if they're testifying like that? In the report, it says that Dom was wearing the seatbelt. Biggest Smelly fan here. All other fans step aside. Kevin coming in coming in with the energy. I like, thank you, Kevin. That's really nice of you. Who are you? Are you new? Thank you for being here. K-Head, hey, what up? Why did he say in the report? You know what? That's it. I've had enough. We're pulling it up right now. I have it right in front of me. Wait, was it Jesus report or was it the medical I have to go back in my Excel sheet. I've looked at so many reports. I'm losing my damn mind. And if I'm looking that deep into reports, you know that there's definitely something wrong here with this case because I wouldn't be putting that much time and energy if I didn't think something was done wrong here. And that should speak a lot for itself because I think y'all know me pretty well at this point. If not, well, baby, we're about to lay with each other and get to know each other real well. Not me getting freaky up here. I want the data that Plunder was able to get from the FOIA. Kevin is trying to get me into some trouble here. Okay, let me look through my documents. I'll bring it up tomorrow. I think we're going to do a discussion tomorrow, live discussion. Just hang out because there's a lot I want to show you guys. And I think you guys need to see it. So let me do some research tonight, but I know I have the report. Hold on. Via the driver's seat, Shirilla was sitting in the driver's seat with her seatbelt on, wedged. Dominic was deceased. Davion had a weak pulse. I know I have the document where it says he was wearing it. Oh, it's in the one where it talks about the injuries. We need to review Detective Hidzu report again. I just did this like a couple of months ago, maybe 1 month ago. We need to review this because that's not right. Dom was wearing a seatbelt. It shows cut in the pictures and in the body cam too. To me, it seems when she hit the curb, she lost all control, airbags deployed. Yeah, the video, some of the people on TikTok saw the video where it kind of shows exactly what happened. I can't believe we missed it. I agree with you, Calissa Katz. I think that, right, they totally cut Dom's seatbelt. Yeah, they did. They did. It's in the photos. So I'll pull them up for tomorrow. I'm new to the chat, but I've been watching all your Mackenzie videos for weeks, says Kevin. Yes, an iPhone has built-in crash detection as well. It was not fully cut when he was extracted, but sliced a little from the extraction. Let's continue. Yeah. Oh. When did iPhone start the crash detection, though? I'm not sure. Back in 2022. Let's look that up. Apple says crash detection introduced on September 16th, 2022. That was after the crash. Wait, what? Okay, yeah, that would make sense. Wait, what does this say? Hold on. Sorry, my document closed. Okay, let's move on. So it wouldn't have been working, existent, but not Mr. Russo, who was in the front seat. Okay, well, that's not true, I don't think. 65, he says, this is just a scene, an overview. Troop says 66. He says the same thing. This is a close-up of the tire tracks that I referred to earlier, Your Honor. The court says, and they're in the grass, correct? He says, yes, Your Honor, bottom right. Troop says 67. He says, this is some of the personal property that was scattered about the scene post impact. Troop says, did you discover the owner of the personal property? He says, yes, sir. Obviously, Your Honor, maybe not obviously, but this property was scattered and the officers put it kind of in one area. Okay, well, why? Like, leave it until the pictures are taken how it was. Because we know Kenzie is not the leader of the big cartel here. Come on, you guys. Like, respectfully, Kenzie wasn't the one with the rugs here. Yeah, she helped and yeah, she jumped into it. She's not El Chapo over here. Let's be clear. They could still have had older phones. September 22 on iPhones 14 and Apple Watch is Series 8. So he says the orange bag ultimately was returned to Miss Shirilla at the hospital. But the orange bag was Dom's. Didn't Kenzie have the black backpack in the coach bag, or am I getting confused? Because she had that vintage coach purse. I'll have to go back in my notes for that. Troop says, okay, identify some of other objects that were of a personal nature that you associated with the impact. Jesus says, I see a cell phone, and the bag was a griefy lean substance that was suspected to be and later field tested for marijuana. Troop says, and how much marijuana? Jesus says, clothing items. Troop says, sorry. Jesus says, a small amount. I don't recall the exact weight. I would say a personal amount. And you need a DEA agent to go in there for a personal amount? No. We know Dom or the Russos are being investigated. And that's not me victim blaming, victim shaming. It's in the documents. And there's photos out there online too. So don't come for me, BB. Even Landon said Dom was packing up his orange backpack. Oh, so it was, yeah, damn. So it was Dom's orange backpack. Life 360 is not very reliable. I use it and it will show my hubby pulling into truck stop, but in real time, he's already there. It's like a few minutes delayed. But the new 17 Pro isn't that much larger. LOL. No, something is off, says Boo Boo. Right? So Troop says, okay, fair enough. Jesus says clothing items, and I believe a purse. Kenzie had her coach purse. Why Kenzie? Okay, I'm gonna say this. Why Kenzie got charged for anything rug related or trafficking is complete bullshit. She might have been contributing to the sales. She wasn't the one handling it, and you guys know that by the text messages. I don't have to tell you here. You know exactly that Dom was the one who had the rugs. I'm not victim shaming. That doesn't mean that I'm glad he's passed or that I'm being a big fat fucking bully. It means that's the truth and it is just the truth. So accept it and let's move on. Actually, all three families should sue 360 because of that. If I was yeah, I would. I would look into that because that's weird. Maybe, maybe not. I think she's guilty of the crash, but yes, I think it's crazy. She got rug charges. It's because she had them on her in the ambulance. How do we know she had them on her? How do we not know that they put him there? I don't know. Things are off in this investigation. Why would she hide them? Kenzie wouldn't hide shit from anyone. You guys know that. Kenzie did not give a fuck, and she would say what was on her mind. We know this. And some of you hate her for that and being disrespectful and being toxic with Dom. But it's like, why? I don't understand why she would be hiding it. Why are they leaving at 5 a.m.? What was going on? It's weird to me. I think she kept them on her body because she believed a minor female could not get searched. Kenzie always had, like, they never cared. Dom was the only one that was paranoid. Not unless Dom told her to. Yeah, I don't see why she would be hiding it for her own purposes. Troop says yesterday, Captain Stanislaw testified that he removed some items from Mackenzie Shirilla as he was treating her in the ambulance. Do you recall? He says that is correct. Did you discover what those items were that he removed from her? There was even like wasn't there casings or ammo in the car? Like, why would she hide the rugs but not that? Because Dom told her in text, even they can't search her. Right, because at the scene, they were just throwing stuff into her purse saying they were gonna sort it out later. Yeah, and he admits to that. He says that they moved all the evidence, and I'm not okay with that. It's a big trauma crash scene that they're going to. Why are you just throwing around evidence from here to there to the purse to the ground? Like, why wasn't that documented? Where's the pictures of where it was actually found? Yeah, boo boo. Let's continue. Did you discover what those items were that he removed from her? Jesus says, yes, sir. The whole situation was captured on body camera of patrolman Matthew Delco. You can see Captain Stanislaw conducting a physical assessment. I would call it a non-medical terminology of her body. And he uncovers a zip black bag quart size of a substance that looked to him like mushrooms and later was identified by the lab to be psilocybin and weighed 6.9 grams, if I recall correctly. Troop says, okay, I'm going to show you States Exhibit 72. Do you recognize it? And if so, what is it? Jesus says, that's it, sir. That is the bag that was recovered from her body. Troop says, okay, containing what? Troop Jesus says, containing the mushrooms that tested positive for psilocybin. Troop says 73. Jesus says this is when he referred to finding a black, he said like CDs, like 2 or 3 CDs. That's what was equated to the measurement wise, It's a digital scale. Troop says, okay. Jesus says, and it was in her waistband. Why would a scale be in her waistband? And like, when did she put it in her waistband? Because if it was at Paul's house, then that definitely proves something was going on there because she did it there. And if it was in the car, why? Like, I don't get that. Somebody said if you see the car right after the car accident, it wasn't shredded. It was after they had the jaws of life on it. Hmm. I don't think she slept with that though. Yeah, so the digital scale made it through her waistband through that fatal crash. Even her damn slipper wasn't on. Nah, I am buying it. That does not make if that's like I'm not buying it. I'm just not. I'm just trying to think like, why would I hide mushrooms in a scale at that time in the morning with my toxic ex-boyfriend? I wouldn't unless Even if someone asked me to, like, did they know they were gonna get pulled over? They were just that worried about it? Why were they so worried about it? Because there was something going on with Dom being investigated? To hide it, but when did it happen? Before or after the crash? Good question, ATS. Hey, girl. The digital scale remained perfectly. Hmm. He says, Troop says, and as it's here, it is fair to say the digital scale is open. He said, yes. Troop says, at the top, it records, at the top where it records over top of it. 74 question mark. Troops or Jesus says the marijuana, suspected marijuana. Troop says, does it indicate exhibit 74 a weight? He says 10 grams. Troop says, when you got this bag of mushrooms, what did you do with it? Jesus says, I turned it over to the medical examiner's lab for testing. Troop says, okay. And did they return a result on their test? Jesus says, yes, they did. Troop says, what was the result here? What is State's Exhibit 71? Jesus says, it's a document that I received indicating that the weight was 6.9 grams with the probability of 95.45% it was mushrooms, a scheduled 1. Troop says, okay. The court says, and Mr. Troop, what was the last crime scene photo? It was like 48 through, Troop says, 48 through 67, Your Honor. The court says, thank you. Troop says, I don't believe I'm going to play any more crash scene video or photographs at this time. The court says, okay. Troop says, for a while, I will stay away from them. Mackenzie Shirilla returns to the courtroom. Troop says, okay, after being assigned the case, the initial stuff that you did in your investigation, I'd like you to lead the court through the next step that you take in your investigation. Jesus says, well, the first thing, Your Honor, was I've got to find, like I said earlier, the team that I wanted helping me through this. That was a very critical piece. And then the second step was identifying external resources that would be necessary. And among those were the staff at Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office, as well as the Ohio State Highway Patrol, which is really one of the lead agencies in our area for crash reconstruction. And so once those steps were identified, I directed Detective Stephen Vane, the evidence technician, to go out to the scene, take new photographs, and conduct knock and talks walking down the street to all of the businesses requesting video and surveillance if available. Simultaneously, Detective Glover, Jason Glover, and myself drove to Metro Hospital to see Mackenzie. Let's look this up. It says, no, the DA does not generally get involved with 10 grams of weed. Federal agencies focus on large scale trafficking, distribution networks, and a massive cultivation operation, not small amounts meant for personal possession. When marijuana remains a controlled substance federally, federal prosecutors typically decline to prosecute low level personal use possession. Local and state authorities handle these matters entirely, and in many places, 10 grams is within legal limits or treated as a minor civil infraction. So, Detective Glover, I don't know why the fuck you are involved in this, because you knew someone was dealing a lot more than 10 grams of rugs, and it wasn't Mackenzie Shirilla. She might have had a role in it. Thank you, Killer Patterns Official, for your super chat. I appreciate you. It's very nice of you. Thank you. This is interesting. Troop says, tell us about your visit to Metro Hospital. Jesus says, so Detective Glover and I arrived. Mackenzie was in ICU. Next to her was her mother, Miss Shirilla. Mackenzie was awake and she had a neck brace. You know, she was bandaged up. Miss Shirilla appeared to be crying. She was visibly upset, and I basically introduced myself, introduced Detective Glover, and explained to them what we were at this point doing here. I would like to hear from Natalie Shirilla what they said they were Glover was doing there. Investigating what? 10 grams of weed? 6 of shrooms? I also explained to Miss Shirilla that at some point I would like to interview Mackenzie to find out what happened. Miss Shirilla expressed some concerns about the reaction of the public on social media to the crash, and Mackenzie and I recalled and Mackenzie, I recall, asked to see photos of the vehicle, which we said, at a later time we can arrange for that. Miss Shirilla finally, before leaving, asked about Mackenzie's cell phone, which at the time was in police possession, Your Honor. The court said was in police possession. The witness says, Hazoo, it was in police. All 3 cell phones were in police possession. They were recovered at the scene. The court says, and by 3, do you mean for Mr. Russo, Mr. Flanagan, and Miss Shirilla? But they left Dom's trap phone out. And that itself should be conflict of interest. I know a lot of you will hate me after that, and that's fine. That phone, I don't care what was on it that had to do with the Russo's law firm or wherever she worked. That phone should have been subpoenaed and should have been entered and should have been extracted. That's total bullshit. Total bullshit. I'm not hung up on the mushrooms at all. Mackenzie was handling the distribution. No, she wasn't, Julio. You need to go back and listen. Mackenzie was not the one handling rugs. Mackenzie wanted to be because she thought it was cool. She was not the one handling the rugs here. She would text Dom every time she sold something, even a cart. She would be like, can I sell this cart? Do you have this cart? So-and-so wants a cart. So before you drop things like that, make sure you have reviewed stuff. I think so too. No worry, Melly. Wait till the appeal and all the records will be subpoenaed. I think the hiding rugs on her person could also be a motive to manipulate Dom. Yeah. They all were, Julio. And she would ask him how much he wants to charge her friends. Yeah. You're just annoying me, respectfully. It's like, read the paperwork. Don't drop your opinions until you have read the paperwork and have gone through everything. And I mean on both parties, respectfully. And most of you have. I'm not talking to anyone in the chat, but just overall in the case, like, look at both sides. No, I have them. The court says, and by 3, do you mean? The witness says, for the 3 of them. Okay, the court says, thank you. Hazoo says, so I informed Ms. Shirilla of my intent to apply for a search warrant because I had reason to believe evidence that could help us put the puzzle together. I had reason to believe evidence that would help us put this puzzle together would be in it. And prior to leaving, Ms. Shirilla indicated that on advice of Mr. Shirilla, they were not going to provide a statement until they consult with legal counsel. Hazoo says, I gave them my business card. The court says, sustained. Tripp says, okay, in addition to taking the mushrooms to the medical examiner's office, did you have other interaction with medical examiner's office? Hazoo says, we had Mackenzie's blood that we turned over to them for testing. Hazoo says, okay, and did you confirm with medical examiner's office regarding autopsies? Hazoo says, yes, that is, I apologize. That's one of the first things we do is I sent an email to the Cuyahoga medical examiner's office requesting a copy of the autopsy report for both Flanagan and Russo when it became available. That was all one day, Your Honor. Troop says, so we're still on August 1st? Hazoo says, oh yeah. Troop says, okay, I'm showing you State's Exhibit 41. Do you recognize this? And if so, what is it? Hazoo says, it looks like the coroner's report, as we call it. I can't tell whose it is. Troop says, are you able to see the name? Hazoo says, let me see. This one is for Mr. Dominic Russo. Troop says, okay, showing you State's Exhibit 42. Hazoo says, both of them say Dominic, but one of them is Davion's. Spelt wrong there. Troop says, "One moment, please, Your Honor." Troop says, "Okay, we'll come back to that, detective. We've already seen some video. Tell us about how you obtained the video." Jesus says, "So first of all, we had a company. The Parma Movers voluntarily provided us an 8-second video clip of the vehicle going westbound on Progress. We obtained that. And then Eurofin's test oil, which is at one of the corners of Progress Drive in Alameda, turned over several videos about different camera angles. And those are the ones we saw yesterday." Troop says, "Handing you Exhibit 5. Did you testify regarding the city cameras?" Jesus says, "Yes. So the city of Strongsville has cameras throughout the city, Your Honor. One camera is at the southwest intersection of Pearl and Progress, mounted on a pole. And that is the first video we saw the Toyota Camry southbound making a right turn going westbound on Progress Drive." Troop says, "Okay, so we're going back to August 1st. You're being introduced to this incident in your investigation of a motor vehicle crash." Jesus says, "Yes, initially we don't know any different. So it is a motor vehicle crash." So they considered it a crash until when? They saw the EDR report in her text messages or what? Like, because we know she didn't get charged for 3 months later. Yep, she wanted to do it 100%, but he took advantage of minors' undeveloped mind and emotions, says K Hood. And in the text, she tells him that she needs to get a job, and he tells her to go run to this place for me, and I'll give you $25. Yeah, he did do that. 100% facts, Melly. Thank you. I think Dom was above Dom, and he was working for his mom, in my opinion. Mackenzie would ask Dom how much, even if the prices hadn't changed. Let's continue. Troop says, "When did your investigation turn from a motor vehicle accident into a homicide investigation?" Jesus says, "I can't point to one specific date and hour." What do you mean? But I can tell you that given the totality of the circumstances, there were some clues to the start kind of being put together that gave us a big picture. Initially, I was a bit surprised at my first interview with Miss Shirilla at the hospital. Okay. So he didn't think she was guilty. Went to the hospital, saw her grieving, then got this is weird. This is a bind over hearing for juvenile court. We'll get into the other stuff after I finish this. McDonald says, "Objection." The court says, "Based on." McDonald said he's editorializing as to what he felt about the interview he's already testified to. The court says, "Overruled." Jesus says, "Your Honor, I was a new detective." Yeah, new detective, it shows. But this was not my first fatal crash. This was not the first time I investigated a motor vehicle crash with fatalities in it. I had done that as a patrolman. The process of looking into it usually starts with reaching out to the survivor, whether it's in the vehicle involved or witness or occupants. And in my experience, having investigated those, people are cooperative and they do want to tell you what happened. So when I arrived at the hospital, and the first concern that Miss Shirilla had was the public reaction to social media. It wasn't in of itself anything wrong, but it just made me think for a second, okay. But the same day later that night and through the next couple of days, Ms. Shirilla made multiple phone calls to the Strongsville Police Department asking to get access to Mackenzie's Snapchat account. She wanted a quote off of there. Simultaneously, this public sends us screenshots of an application called Life 360 and some photos of Mackenzie in the public captured on social media. So Troop says, "Let me stop you right there. I want to talk about Life 360 since you brought it up. What time in your investigation did you investigate the cell phone and app Life 360? Describe it, please." Jesus says, "Your Honor, Life 360 is a social media application that allows users to share their location with friends and family. I had seen it being used by parents on their kids' phones, but I've also seen friends use it because it can be social. Like, here's where we're at. Through the application, depending on the level of subscription you have, it can show you multiple different things." Troop says, "Okay, so you suggested that you were receiving information about people regarding Life 360. Specifically, whose Life 360 account were you getting information from?" Jesus says, "Mr. Davion Flanagan." Troop says, okay, and who was providing the information? Jesus says, the first one was received. We received two, Miss Deanna and Miss Tyler Croy. Okay, and I'm showing you Exhibit 35. Do you recognize that? He says, yes. What is Exhibit 35? Jesus says, you need to scroll down. The court says, if you need to step down, you can. Jesus says, well, because there's multiple of them. Chip says, well, I just want to know about 35. Jesus says, 35 is, I need to come close if you don't mind. Chip says, step down. If that's all right, go ahead. Jesus says, okay, 35 is, this is a map of the phone, Mr. Davion Flanagan's cell phone. It leaves the location of where they were at before the crash on Brushwood Lane off Whitney Road in the northeast section of City of Strongsville. And they go down Whitney to Pearl and they make a right turn going westbound on Progress. This little extension here, that's when Strongsville police had custody of the phone. They were still on and we drove them to the police station. So this is post crash. This is us taking the phone. The court says, and you're pointing to the last line that's going from side to side of the street. Jesus says, this, Your Honor, from there to here, yes. The court says, thank you. Jesus says, this is before the crash. The court says, which is just for purposes of the record. If it's the circle that's farthest to the left on, Jesus says, the circle that is, yes, the location. Jesus says, or Troop says, stay here for a minute because I want to show you something more. Does 35 also show the time that the Life 360 started recording Davion's movements? Jesus says, not the specific one, but this one gives you a general idea of the timeline that Mr. Croy had for Mr. Flanagan, which is 11:39 p.m. until 5:26 a.m. So that's the timeline. And then he gave us smaller screenshots, snippets by the, I don't want to say by the hour, but quite extensive. The court says, so based on this, it's not indicating that it took them from 11:30 to 5:30. The witness says, no, 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 no. The court says, actually, to make that route, right? The witness says, no, that's just general. At this location, Your Honor, they were on Brushwood Lane from 11:39 until 5:27. They were at, the court says, got it, okay. Troop says, and whose house was that? Jesus says, this would be Mr. Paul's house. Troop says, okay. Jesus says, so this places Davion at the residence from 11:39 p.m. until 5:27 a.m. Troop says, all right, while you're still here, Exhibit 36 is what? Jesus says, Exhibit 36, this is another point that is captured between 5:30 and 5:31 a.m. And what you have here, Your Honor, is Pearl Road. Given just the location, this is above 71. So they were in the area of Cherry Tree Apartments by Lowe's. The phone sent a signal to the app, and that's where they were because I can tell this is Whitney. I know this is Interstate 71. That's where they end up at. I had not heard of Cherry Tree Apartments by Lowe's. So they were in the area. Exhibit 37, says Troop. Jesus says, this is the area of Pearl Road and Valley Parkway. Troop says, and Exhibit 38, Jesus says, this is approximately the turn from Pearl Road onto Progress Drive. Southbound Pearl to westbound Progress and make a right turn. Troop says, and then the time that the Life 360 app indicates, he says between 5:33 and 5:34. I guess I'm just curious with the Cherry Apartments. Are they close to the apartments or just in the area? Troop says, and Exhibit 39, he says, so Exhibit 39, this is one snapshot that kind of changed, if you will, how I was approaching this crash. First thing is we see that the phones are now pinging well into the area where generally, and this is not a super accurate, I don't presume, but we see a speed down there. The court said, is this through Life 360? He says, yes. The court says, okay. So he just looked at Life 360 and saw Okay, that's interesting. He says, this is a screenshot because you can give your friends the ability to send alerts to friends like this is one of them. We saw that Don progress of speed was 90 miles an hour. Progress was 35. We know that there was one hard braking and one high speed. So three phones. Three phones were communicating with each other. This is very unsophisticated. Social media gave us changed the trajectory of the investigation. Chip says, and exhibit 40. Jesus says, this is the one that I put in my report, Your Honor. You can see progress drive right here. Okay. And it shows that the speed down here is 90 miles an hour. So that just kind of gives you where the speed happened. The court says the last one was what, 39 or 40? Troop says 40 was the last one, Your Honor. Troop says, you identified photographs of the EDR. Tell us about your investigation and how you obtained that, and tell us the subsequent data that was generated from the EDR. Jesus says, so the first thing I did through the committee of investigators was I tasked the Lieutenant Jeffrey Mason, who is a reconstructionist, to reach out to the Highway Patrol and get them to come out and help us extract the actual device and the data, extricate the device and extract the data. And so Lieutenant Mason was in charge of this. I applied for a search warrant, was granted the search warrant, and pursuant to the search warrant, the Ohio State Highway Patrol Sergeant Ryan Fox took possession of the device, downloaded it, and gave us the data shortly thereafter. He gave us the raw data, Your Honor, and then later gave me a report of his analysis. Chip says, okay, what did you do with that data? Jesus says, well, I gave it to you. And I also turned it over to Sergeant Fox and later to the Southwest Crash Investigation Team. So I had two entities looking at the data. I wanted to get this right. I wanted to make sure that we are not doing wrong by Miss Shirilla. Well, Detective Hazu, you did do wrong. Because you should have never been involved with you being so deeply involved with the Russos, being called to their home and having a say in any report. That's already you knowing them. So you did do wrong by Mackenzie Shirilla, in my opinion. That's not cool. And if I get charged for anything one day, I want to make sure there's no conflict of interest and nothing like that going on in my case where I'm doing life. That's crazy work. Dirty work, if you ask me. Not cool. Yeah, he's a detective. Yeah, he's involved, but no way. They could have found someone else. They could have found another detective. Yeah. She was actually more mature than Dom. Stop just ignoring and shutting me out. Let's talk like adults and work through it. She was a meal at the time, a dealer. Holy shit, what did he just say? He should absolutely be able to pinpoint the exact moment. Exactly. That's nuts. How could that be overlooked? Exactly. How could it be overlooked? Yeah, he just based his whole investigation on 360. He literally says that. Doesn't it say right on the website that the information from like 360 should never be used in the court of law? Let's pull it up. Um, I don't know where I would find that on Life 360. I'd have to go through this whole website. Investor trust and safety. Partnerships. Yeah, I'm curious to see like what their like how accurate Life 360 always is, because I've heard it hasn't been very accurate. but I've never used it. So maybe I'll have to my dad's gonna think it's weird I'm trying to track him or ask him to track me. He's gonna be like, "What the hell? I never even did that when you were acting crazy." He's gonna be like, "Now you want us to track you? Not when you were running a schmuck?" Yeah, I was a big party animal. I can admit my mistakes. I was a big, big party girl. I wouldn't come home for days. I would go to raves. I enjoyed my life. Oh, okay. Let me pull up this Life 360. I'm getting distracted here, telling you guys about my sins. I repented. Okay. Okay. Let's move on. I think it says I'll have to do research into Life 360, boo boo. Maybe we can do that together. Oh, you did it for me. 360 can be used as evidence in court, but is not automatically admissible. To use it, you must prove its reliability to the judge because it is consumer grade app rather than it's too long to post, but you'd have to get an expert because it's not reliable evidence. Let's continue. Mr. McDonald says, objection. Jesus says, that's the purpose of it. The court says, overruled. Jesus says, this is the purpose, Your Honor. We saw two different opinions on the same data. Who saw two different opinions? You in Life 360? Troop says, Detective, I'm just going to ask you, go back because I made a mistake on my hard drive or my thumb drive. I'm handing you 41 and 42. Jesus says, yes, sir. The court says, well, 41 you had marked as a medical examiner report. Troop says, that's correct. The court says, that's what that is. Okay. Troop says, is that the same thing? Jesus says, yes, Your Honor. That is 41. Thank you. And 42, Your Honor, is Mr. Davion Flanagan's autopsy report. Troop says, do they provide a cause and manner of death? Wait, why are you just ignoring that? Who had two differing opinions? You and the other investigators, or you and the investigators against 360? Because that matters. Two different opinions on the same data. I thought they all needed to be on the same page. No? To convict someone for life in prison. No, maybe I don't know shit about Life 360. Okay, you can tell me that too. Interesting. Okay, let's go. Let's move on. Jesus says, yes, they do at the bottom. Troop says, what is it? For Mr. Dominic Russo, cause of death, I quote, blunt force impacts to head, trunk, extremities with skeletal, visceral, and soft tissue injuries. Auto, fixed objects, accident, passenger. And for 42, Jesus says for 42, which is Mr. Davion Flanagan's cause of death, multiple blunt force injuries, auto, fixed objects, accident, passenger. Troop says, did you obtain a search warrant to get medical records for Mackenzie Shirilla? He says, yes, I did. Tell us about it. He says, I actually obtained two. Tell us about them. Yes. So, Your Honor, we have a fatality and we had the mushrooms and the marijuana. So I want to see if this was an accident of some sort. So I wanted to look at Miss Mackenzie Shirley's medical records to see if there was a medical reason that it could have been contributed or caused this crash. I also wanted the toxicology report that should have been included with the medical release, but was not. However, not knowing how long, given the extent of her injuries, I wasn't sure how long she was going to be at the hospital. So I applied for the first search warrant from the day she got there, July 31st, until August 4th. And then I just said, whenever she gets released, we'll apply for a second search warrant for August 5th until the end. Troop says, and did you ultimately do that? He says, I did, yes. Troop says the medical records of Mackenzie Shirilla came to you in two separate pieces based on two separate search warrants you executed. Jesus says, yes, that is correct. Troop says, okay, those have been testified to by Dr. Sang earlier in this case, correct? Jesus says, yes, sir, that is correct. Trip says, did you obtain ultimately any blood samples of Mackenzie Shirilla? Jesus says, so your honor, if I may use this word, we had a little fiasco with the blood situation with the hospital. Yeah, a little fiasco. No, get it together. If I ever made it to the feds, that's a big if, will still be denied. Respectfully, of course. Yeah, wasn't her blood, I'm convinced. Really? That upgraded Life 360 paid for all the extra stuff. I remember Davion's friend saying that's why he was upset. It didn't say send crash alert. No, you just want to rewrite history, it seems. But he did all that before even being with her. I'm reading your comments, but if they ever investigated something this big before or this bad. Mackenzie was the way she treated him, drove him crazy. Hell, if she was mine, I'd be bashing my head into the walls. THC level was way too low, even if she was taking a break. She got life. Let's continue. I don't want to miss your guys' comments because I want to see if anyone says anything good. I read all of the comments and the comments that you leave too. Oh, thank you, Kay and Abuelitas, for the eagle and the gifts. I cannot wait until the federal trial in Supreme Court. If it gets there, yeah. That's why I like you, Millie. All the truth, no matter how or who exposes it, you state facts. Yeah, I'm just reading public documents. I'm dead. Has Mackenzie herself said if she ever took anything that night, like, or if she smoked? Let's continue. He says, there's a little fiasco with the blood situation with the hospital. So here's what happened. The language of the search warrant that I applied for included toxicology reports. I served the warrant on August 4th, 2022 in the afternoon hours. A few days later, they supplied me the medical report, but it had no toxicology in it. So I started inquiring and I found out that on August 5th, a day after I searched the warrant, they disposed of the blood, Mackenzie's blood. Okay. What do you mean disposed of? I just what do they mean disposed of the blood? We don't know if she was really on a break from smoking other than text. And so I went down a rabbit hole with LabCorp that does the testing and with the medical records in their legal department, and everybody was shifting blame. At the end, they said medical records never told LabCorp about the existence of search warrant and pursuant to a policy that they have on the 5th day, they disposed of whatever blood they had. So anytime there's a 5-day, whatever blood gets thrown out. So LabCorp gets rid of everything on the 5th day. So they told me that they had blood from August 3rd and 4th, and they still have. So we obtained those samples, but not from the day of the crash where she's being charged, respectfully. I'm concerned about the blood draw as well as they do a legal blood draw, which requires a chain of custody each step, and it was handled in the way that it makes it subject to questions. I mean, how many years have I been on Earth? And that has never happened to me. And I'm pretty sure I've been involved with some lab corpse. Huh. Has that happened to you guys? They lose a sample of your blood? Don't convict her because you don't like her. So why are you convicting Dom? I'm not convicting Dom of anything except other than what's in the paperwork. So I don't know why you're acting like just because someone passes doesn't mean we just ignore everything. So they told me they had blood from August 3rd and 4th, not the 31st. Not even the first, not even the second. However, once we turned them over to medical examiner's office, I believe they tested them. We never received the results of those. Wait, what? Received results from what? The 31st? So they had no record. Absolutely no record. Yeah, I'm confused. He says they had blood from August 3rd and 4th that they still have. So we obtained those blood samples. Okay, but that doesn't make any sense. They don't have the first from the 31st because at 5 days they get rid of it. Why would they still have it at this point? That would exceed over 5 days. So they told me that they had blood from August 3rd and 4th, and they still have those blood samples. However, we turned them over to medical examiners. I don't believe they tested them. We never received those results. Troop says, did you obtain a blood sample that you did receive results for? He says, yes. I found out through the course of my investigation that during the life flight from the crash scene to Metro, the medics withdrew 2 blood vials or 2 specimens, and they were kept at the blood bank. And so I applied for a search warrant, another separate search warrant specifically for that blood. And I was able to obtain one of the 2, which was ultimately overturned to the Cuyahoga County lab for testing. Troop says, and those blood draws were taken in the Life 360 from July 31st. He says about 7:30 in the morning, 7:36, I believe. He says, did you submit those to the medical examiner? He says, I did, yes. Did you receive a toxicology report from the medical examiner then? He says, yes, sir. And how, and now I'm showing you States Exhibit 47. Do you recognize it? If so, what is it? Jesus says, this is a result that we were provided from the medical examiner's office for the blood that was taken on 7:31 at 7:36 in the morning. Okay, I'm catching on now. He says, "Are you able to see the data contained in Exhibit 41 from the witness stand?" He says, "Yes." Troop says, "Can you read?" Sorry, I'm thinking as I'm reading. "Can you read for the record? Well, we can see there are 3 positive results in the blood, correct?" He says, "That is correct." Troop says, "Can you read into the record what the results are and the amounts?" Jesus says, it says the NMS lab C report and then 11OH delta 9 THC was positive, 4.6 nanograms per milliliter, delta 9 THC, COH positive, 34 nanograms per milliliter, and then delta 9 was positive, 10 nanograms per milliliter of blood. Troop says these numbers 4.6 nanograms per millimeter or milliliter, 34 nanograms per milliliter, 10 nanograms per milliliter. As a detective, are those significant to you? He says, yes, because at least the bottom one based on, okay, Your Honor, to better understand this, I saw another professional device from a drug recognition expert. Why does he avoid questions like that? Like, why does he do that? Like, answer the question, just answer the fucking question. And you had to go to other experts, like, okay, fine. And I give him those results. Based on these findings, I was able to determine that the one important to us was the last line, the delta 9 THC. He says, why is it important? Because that is the THC of the metabolites that are in the blood that would be used should we have charged the OVI. So they definitely considered charging OVI. Yeah, what's going on? Y'all are being bad. Oh my gosh. Yeah, stop arguing with each other. We're just reading the transcripts. Nobody's victim shaming or victim bashing. Don't, if you guys have a problem with it, talk to Strongsville PD, okay? Talk to Strongsville Police Department. It's not my problem. I didn't release all documents. Karma's a bitch, though. I do believe that. Hey, Missy. Would be upset for going over court documents. Y'all be the jury and decide. They should have not been together and having sleepovers, period. Okay, yeah. We know the Shirillas should have stopped that. We know Miss Russo should have stopped that too. Dom was 18 but was living on her property. They should have never been dating, and both parents should have had more say in that relationship. Unfortunately, that's not the way it was. That's not the way it always is. Sometimes you can't control teenagers. Like, if my parents had a problem with someone I was dating, we were having problems at home because of it. You know what I'm saying? Are you a perfect parent, Kelly J? Just wondering. No, I know. Very interesting. So the blood from day of never got tested. So charge the OVI. Troop says, okay, and we don't have an OVI charge. He says, no. Troop says, okay, moving back to your investigation, did there come a time where you returned for a second visit to the Metro Health Hospital? Jesus says, I did. He says, and why? Jesus says, if I recall correctly, so we obtained the first 3 search warrants, Your Honor. I saw assistance in obtaining them and completing them from Assistant Prosecuting Attorney Sarah Hutnick. She helped me obtain those warrants. One of them was from Mackenzie Shirilla's phone. Now, Ms. Shirilla wanted the cell phone back. Once I had the search warrant in hand, I made contact with Ms. Shirilla. I told her that I had the phone. I asked for either she can provide voluntarily the passcode so we can download the data and return the phone to her as quickly as possible, or having been approved the search warrant, I was going to turn it over to the technicians. That process could have taken weeks. I have a problem with this and I need to look more into it, but I'm pretty sure they were never supposed to get records from her psychiatrist or mental health professional without, from what I heard, that's not allowed. Isn't when you go to a psychiatrist, isn't that like medical confidentiality? Did they get a search warrant to do that? We need a review. We need a review. I know. I'm not a perfect parent, Melly. Oh, not me. Okay. These documents are very interesting. Who's bashing? No one's bashing. If you don't like to hear the truth, then don't be involved in the case. No one bashed anyone. Who's bashing? Me? I'm bashing? Who did I bash? I thought unless they were arguing a plea of insanity would be able to. Yes, it's HIPAA. I believe in karma. It always comes back. Sometimes that's all we need. Yeah, but HIPAA, they can be requested in the event a legal matter such as this. Hmm. What's interesting is it's not in the FOIA documents. There's no search warrant for the medical professionals. It's only for Rosie Graham, social media, or subpoena. I don't see a search warrant for that, but I don't know how that works when the school's involved, and I don't really know all that. So I have to do more research before I speak on it. Hmm. So Miss Shirilla he says that process could have taken weeks. So Miss Shirilla, while I was on the phone, put me on hold. She consulted with Mackenzie, and then Mackenzie provided the passcode for the phone, downloaded the data the same day, either the same day or the next day. I took the phone back to the hospital, and that was a second visit. Troop says, so you were returning Mackenzie's cell phone to her. Jesus says, along with property, a bag, the orange bag, some money, some cash. So they gave her Dom's backpack. Did you ever encounter Mackenzie Shirilla when you went to the hospital? He says, yes. Did you make any statements? Mackenzie was awake and alert. There was some tension with the family members, but I provided them a search warrant with the affidavit so they knew what I was looking at. I wasn't trying to hide anything. And Mackenzie, when I explained to Miss Shirilla and Mr. Shirilla what's in the affidavit and the fact that ultimately, once we're done, the prosecutor's office will review and determine charges since she was just a juvenile. Mackenzie said something about to the effect of take my license for 10 years or something of that sort. And the quote is in my report because it was recorded on my body cam. So I'd have to look at my report for the exact quote. McDonald says, we'll stipulate to whatever it is in the report, whatever it says exactly. The court says, is that his police report? What is that? Troop says, that is his police report. It is. And then Troop says, is it your testimony as you're testifying that you don't recall exactly the statement Mackenzie Shirilla made to you at the hospital? He says, not word for word. He can't even get on stand and explain, like, testify to what Mackenzie said to him. Hello? Does anyone believe in notebooks and pens? Like, I don't know. Write that shit down. I don't get it. Was your body cam not on? What? You don't even remember her statement in the hospital. So you don't even know what she said. You can't testify to that. Why do I have a problem with that? Thought it was being audio recorded. I would just want someone to write down and record my statement, dude. What the fuck? Mackenzie was also on hella rugs because she was hurt. He says, not word for word, but to the effect of take my license for 10 years. Okay, that's good enough. Did you record the statement in your report? He says, yes. Okay, the exact statement? He says, yes. And you're testifying, do you recall the exact statement? Yes or no? He says, no. Okay, if you were to review your report, would it refresh your recollection as to the exact same statement that Mackenzie Shirilla made to you? He says, yes. Troop says, that's not the same thing though. Because when he records her about the 10 years, isn't that a different occasion? Either way, he says he's not testifying that he remembers. He says no. Okay, if you were to review a report, would it refresh your recollection as to the exact statement that Mackenzie made to you? He says yes. Your Honor, may I present detective with a copy of this report? The court says yes. Troop says this is Exhibit 100. Troop says, detective, please look at this. Refresh your recollection when you're finished. Let me know. Does that refresh your recollection? He says yes. What did Mackenzie Shirilla tell you? Take my license for 10 years or something. Did you speak to Ms. Shirilla when you were at the hospital for the second time? Semi, Mr. Shirilla. Semi. He wasn't very friendly. Troop says, did he tell you where Mackenzie lived? Yes. He uttered without being prompted by me that Mackenzie was living with Dominic Russo at his house. And where was Dominic Russo's house? On Loon Road, across from the high. Is it Lun or Loon? From the high school in the area of Strongsville. So we know he was living on the off house, the main house. There was a separate house. Whose name was that house under? Just a question. Okay, during the course of your investigation, were you able to corroborate Mr. Shirilla's statement that Mackenzie lived at Dominic Russo's house? He says yes. Was that house under Dom's name? I'm curious. He responds, yes. Question, how did you corroborate that? Multiple people, as well as Miss Christine Russo, Dominic's mother, Angela Russo, Dominic's brother, who lived in the house next door, as well as recordings from Mackenzie's social media where she said in a video she was trying to make entry into the house. He says, okay, do you have any idea how long Mackenzie has been residing with Dominic in that house? He says, we were given a range of several months, 6 months or so. Troop says, you testified that several people had told you things, that you've been getting information from folks. Did you conduct any interviews in conjunction with your investigation? Jesus says, yes. Troop says, who did you interview? Jesus says, so Your Honor, one of the most important things for us was to try, we got a lot of people who voluntarily came forward with information and under oath and in good faith. I can't say it was all positive towards Mackenzie. So I wanted to look for those people who knew Mackenzie and maybe had a different story. So I sought the people who were present at Paul's house on the night of the incident. Troop says, okay, I want to stop there. Who was present, or did you find out who was present? He says, yes, I interviewed Paul and he identified all the individuals present at his house. He came to the Strongsville Police Department for an interview accompanied by his mother and father. Troop says, who did Paul tell you was at the house? He mentioned the name Rosie. He mentioned the name Landon, Nina. That's 3, himself, and then Miss Russo, Mr. Flanagan, and Mackenzie. Troop says, okay, since we're talking about Paul, describe a little more about his interview, what he told you took place that night, and these folks, 7 folks were at his house. Jesus says, Your Honor, what Paul said was that it was a low-key event. It wasn't a party. They weren't, there to dance and have a loud night. It was very laid back. In fact, he mentioned that he went to bed early, leaving his friends down there. I asked him about the circumstances of what was going on, and he basically said they were watching some South Park, another TV show, and they smoked on some marijuana, but no alcohol, nothing crazy, and they went to sleep. Troop says, did Paul tell you he specifically who smoked marijuana? Jesus says, he just said they, and further probing did not really reveal any positive identification. He just said they. Troop says, so of the 7 folks there, he didn't identify any specific person as smoking marijuana? He says no. Troop says, did he identify anybody as ingesting alcohol? Jesus says no. He said there was no alcohol. Troop says, did he identify anybody as using cocaine, methamphetamine, anything like that? Jesus says, no, I did ask about the shroomies because we intercepted pursuant to the search warrant on Mackenzie's phone. Text between Rosie and Mackenzie ordering a list of rugs for the friend. They have, Paul wants this, bring that, this kind of thing with everybody's name on it. It's in this report, it's in the text, and so I wanted to know if they consume mushrooms. I mean, there were mushrooms at the scene. There's text about mushrooms before the crash. At the time, we didn't have the blood, and so that's kind of what I asked, and he said, no, we didn't consume any. We discussed it, but we didn't do it. Troop says, all right, well, when you conducted an interview as Rosie, then you conducted an interview of Rosie as well? He says, no. Rosie, I reached out to her, left her 1 or 2 voicemails. Her mother answered. She scheduled an interview. Troop says, I'm sorry, detective, but you seem to look to your left when you say Rosie. Why is that? Jesus says, yes, I see her. She's sitting there. Troop says, Rosie is in the courtroom today. Have you seen her before physically? He says, physically, no, pictures. Troop says, this is the first time? Jesus says, yes. Tell us more about your attempts to interview Rosie. Jesus says, I left her 2 voicemails. Like I said, she was identified as one of Mackenzie's best friends. And frankly, there was so much negative stuff coming about Mackenzie. I was looking for something good, something to balance it out, and she never answered. Her mother called me and we scheduled an interview. And then on the day of the interview, her dad, a retired police chief, canceled, and that was it. You conducted an interview of Landon. He says, I did. Okay, how did that take place? We drove down to Marietta College where he was playing football and his father was present. It was, I'd say, about an hour. Again, he had good things to say. He shed some light on Davion, who was a good friend of his, and it just made the picture clear. If I may add this, Your Honor, I'm a combat veteran and I served in the Army. Mr. McDonald says, I will object. The court says sustained. He says, did you interview Nina? The detective says no. Troop says, okay, did you attempt to? He says, I did, and her mother wouldn't let her. She said she has nothing to say to you. No, you bring your ass in court and you tell them what's going on. How can be I thought once you were like subpoenaed, you had to go in there. No? It's interesting. Tom says both families danced with the devil. Karma caught up with both families. Oof. Now we're getting real deep. Yeah, I want to know why Nina wasn't talked to. With both Kenzie and Dom's lifestyles, both parents had to hide things and say whatever to defend their children. I get it, but it doesn't change the outcome. You can look her up public. Go watch the videos. Interesting. If not a warrant is issued. Okay, this is reminding me of the David case. I need to do an update on that this weekend. But David, his parents didn't want to go in and they were subpoenaed. Do you remember this? They can serve you a warrant, but if you fail to appear once there's opinion, they don't always do that. Hmm. He says, okay, so did you learn when you were talking to Paul and Landon, did you learn anything about the relationships between these 7 folks? Jesus says, yes, they were. So Landon explained to me that he and Rosie were dating. They were in college at different schools. Mackenzie and Dominic, the court says, I'm sorry, what is that crinkling noise? Mackenzie says, my inaudible. Mr. McDonald said, she's a diabetic. The court says, okay, that's fine. Just wanted to make sure. Wait, Kenzie's a diabetic? What? Wait, I had not heard this. Kenzie is a diabetic. Mr. McDonald says she's a diabetic. The court said, okay, that's fine. Just want to make sure. Mr. McDonald says, sure. Wait, wait, wait. Have you guys had heard that? Did I miss this somewhere? No way. I have gone through everything. I have gone through everything 2 times. Why would an attorney lie in court about her being diabetic? Do you really think that he would? Kenzie's diabetic. It literally says that right here. So there's like some noise in the background. The court says, I'm sorry, what is that crinkling noise? Mackenzie says, it says inaudible. So they weren't able to understand her. Mr. McDonald, her lawyer says she's a diabetic. And then Troop says, and then he just proceeds. He's talking about Kenzie. It literally goes from Kenzie, something was making noise, and it was Kenzie said, my redacted. And then McDonald said, she's a diabetic. The court says, okay, that's fine. Just wanted to make sure. Troop says Rosie and Landon were dating. Mackenzie and Dominic were dating. Davion was there. Nothing about the relationship between Davion, Nina, or Paul. So there were 2 couples and 3 singles. Troop says, when you interviewed Paul, was he awake when Mackenzie, Dominic, and Davion left his house at 5:30? Jesus says, no, Your Honor. What he said was he went to sleep around 1 a.m., woke up to use the restroom sometime between 2 and 3. Mackenzie was asleep, and then he went back to sleep. And according to him, he woke up around 10 a.m. He was notified by Rosie of the tragic accident. Yeah, I'm just like, we're not sure who he was talking about. Okay, I was gonna say, I don't remember her being diabetic, and that's important. Um, Maybe Mr. McDonald was confused with diabetic and maybe POTS? Yeah, I was gonna say, I know I didn't remember her being a diabetic. I don't know why there's people that hate me so much in here. Good to see you, Free Mackenzie Shirilla. Yeah, okay, so she was not diabetic. Okay, I almost panicked. I was like, that would make things different. Okay. So that's weird Mr. McDonald would say that, but let's move on. Who is Officer Galassi? Officer Galassi was a first responding officer at the scene, and he was the one who wrote the report. The initial responder, says Troop. Yes, the patrol report. Did Officer Galassi write any other reports in conjunction with this investigation? Jesus says he wrote multiple. He wrote the OH1, the crash report, and he at a later time provided me a supplemental of an incident that happened at Metro Hospital. Troop says, okay, the OH1, the crash report, we saw that incorporated into Trooper Rawson's analysis. The crash reconstructionist yesterday, correct? Jesus says, yes, that's the OH1 and OH2. Troop says, okay, then you said that Officer Galassi wrote an additional supplement at your request. Jesus says, yes. Troop says, okay, tell us about that. Your Honor, on August 6th of 2022, Officer Galassi was still training Patrolman Zelinsky. And they were at Metro Hospital at the ER for an unrelated crash that had nothing to do with this case. While they were standing awaiting for the patient, the victim, to come out some of the testing, a Metro Health sergeant by the name of Adam Doyle approached the officers and asked them if they were wearing body cameras. The officers said yes. He asked them if they were actively recording. They said no. It was at that point that Sergeant Doyle started asking about the Mackenzie Shirilla investigation. He wanted to know if she was being charged, what's the status of the case. While the officers did not respond, just said it's under investigation, Sergeant Doyle made a statement to the effect that, like sometime around August 6th, Mackenzie was attempting to leave the hospital to attend Mr. Russo's funeral, and her father, they were trying to stop her. At some point, her father made a comment to the police, who were summoned by the medical staff, that she tried to unalive herself and killed her 2 friends, and he wanted her to be evaluated. It's interesting because they said she was never grieving, but it sounds to me like she was in the hospital and she was really going through it, and she was like, "I don't wanna be here anymore, like, I killed my 2 friends." Thank you, Tom. Love you too. I used to think that was done, like, with malice, but it's like, now that I have a good overall picture, I could see that because I would be doing the same too. Um, that makes me sad. Um Troop says, "Is that Miss Shirley's exact statement that he made to Officer Galassi?" Galassi, I don't know. Jesus says, "So this is what was conveyed in his report." Troop says, "What you referred to the court was the exact statement that Mr. Shirilla made." Jesus says, "I would have to look at the report to tell you exact words." Troop says, "So are you testifying that you don't recall the exact statement?" He says, "Not verbatim, but to the effect." Troop says, "Is it in your report?" He says, "It's in my report." Would it refresh your recollection if I allowed you to review the report? He says, yes, sir. Mr. McDonald says, we'll stipulate to whatever the report says. The court says, thank you. Chip says, this is Exhibit 100. Please refresh your recollection. Jesus says, I'm sorry, Your Honor. My report's 92 pages. It's going to take a minute. The court says, that's all right. Anyone need a break? He says, okay, yeah. Troop says, okay, defense has stipulated, so you could read the statement into the record. Jesus says, oh, all right. So both Patrolman Galassi and Patrolman Zielinski, Mr. McDonald says, objection. Troop says, just a statement, detective. He says, well, I'm trying to find it. Well, you were so clued in. Can't remember? She's just too nice to expose the real. Who, me? No. I'm not saying you guys are hating on me. I saw someone that was trashing me in comments, is in comments now. So if I was such trash, respectfully, why are you back in my chat if you don't like me and you're leaving hateful comments for people to unsubscribe and come bully me? Because when is that ever okay? Interesting. I'm not going to keep my mouth shut. That's not okay. I know it's a thing on YouTube, but like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. You can apologize or you can get out of my chat respectfully. And that person knows who I'm talking about. It's no one here right now. I'm convinced our girl knows more. You guys need to go watch some different You guys need to go watch Keezy. He says, well, I'm trying to find it. Troop says, I'm sorry. Jesus says, it's like there's too many pages. It's your report, dude. What do you mean it's too many pages? Troop says, look, detective, look at the, Jesus says, okay, I see it. I got it. And I quote, Mr. McDonald says, well, wait, can we approach the bench for a moment? The court says, sure. So they have sidebar. The court says, we are back on the record. You may continue to inquire. Troop says, detective, we were talking about a statement that Mr. Shirilla made to Galassi, and there's been a stipulation to the statement. Would you agree that the statement Galassi reported to was Mr. Shirilla stated to him that they had to keep her in the hospital because she had already tried to unalive herself and she unalived those two boys? Jesus says, no. The statement was made to Sergeant Doyle, who conveyed that to Officer to Galassi. Is that statement accurate? He says, yes, sir. Troop says, thank you. Does Mackenzie Shirilla possess a valid Ohio driver's license? He says, yes, sir. How do you know? Your Honor, at the time of the crash, they called her license in an attempt to identify her, and they called her in over the audio through the law enforcement automated data system. Everybody's license is connected with the BMV, so I was provided as part of the case jacket her BMV printout dated 7/31/2022, which has her name, address, date of birth, all demographics. So that's how I know that she had a valid license. Once people read enough of the public available records, they will see there's reasonable doubt and why there's corruption at play for more than just the case. Thank you, Noel. Is Keezy on YouTube? Yes, she is. Keezy IRL. I know, Shug. If I took my man out, I would be in a mental institution. I wouldn't bounce back that fast. After seeing how Karen Reed was railroaded, let's continue. Did you investigate Mackenzie Shrilla's driving license history? He says, I did. How did you do that? He says, I reached out to a BMV investigator by the name of Michelle, and I asked her to provide me copies of the application for anything affiliated with Shrilla's license number. Troop says, and did she respond with documents? Yes, she did. Okay, I'm showing you State's Exhibit 43. What is this document? Jesus says, I think this is a certification of authenticity. Troop says, okay, and? He says, I have to get closer, Mr. Troop. Troop says, okay. Jesus says, I can't see. So he steps down. Troop says, this is Exhibit 43. Jesus says, okay, Your Honor, this is document dated September 18th, 2019 for a permanent ID card in the name of Mackenzie Shirilla, and it lists her address. It's just an ID card. Troop says, is it signed by Mackenzie? Jesus says, this is signed by Mackenzie and her mom. Troop says, well, why are you here? I'll show you exhibit 44, 45, and 46. This is 44, certificate of authenticity. Jesus says, Your Honor, this is a temporary permit application, and this is dated 10/7 of 2022 for a Class B operator driver. Troop says, okay. Jesus says, this was too signed by Mackenzie and Ms. Shirilla as a co-signer because at the time she was under 18. Troop says, and there are some agreements or statements that they are signing in this application. Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, okay. Jesus says, Your Honor, those are the questions that the Ohio B&B asks, and based on your answers, you have to sign at the bottom and the co-signer, and then it says inaudible. So the court reporter couldn't hear what he said. Troop says, and what are the highlighted portions here? Jesus says, they ask, I do not have a condition that results in an episodic impairment of consciousness or loss of muscular control. I do not have physical and mental condition that prevents me from exercising reasonable or ordinary control of a motor vehicle. And the last one, I'm not chemically dependent on any alcohol or drugs. Troop says, and signed by Mackenzie and Natalie. It says, yes, signed by Mackenzie. Okay. So Troop says, exhibit 45. Jesus says, this is a certificate of authenticity, and this, Your Honor, is a first official Ohio driver's license, Class B, with her Ohio license number. What's the date? Jesus says, the date is April 22nd, 2021. The same statement and signature by Ms. Shirilla and her mother. Exhibit 46. This is a certificate of authenticity, Your Honor. This is for duplicate driver's license dated 10/21 of 2022. The same questions were asked. The highlighted portions say, I do not have a physical or mental condition that prevents me from exercising reasonable and ordinary control of a motor vehicle. Okay, the same things. I'm not dependent, etc. Troop says, this was obtained a month, maybe 7 weeks after the accident or the crash, correct? He says, that is correct. Troop says, okay, thank you. You obtained a search warrant and enlisted Mark Sargent to assist you with reviewing the Toyota service records and the Toyota forensic examination, correct? Jesus says, correct. All right. And did you conduct additional interviews of Dominic's family in your investigation? He says, yes, sir. I interviewed Dominic's mother and I interviewed his brother. So on separate occasions. Troop says, okay, did you also interview a man named Christopher Martin Hench? He says, yes, I did, sir. Okay, what about anybody else? The court says, I'm sorry, Christopher what? Troop says, Christopher Hench. That's Hench. The court says, thank you. Troop says, anybody else? He says, I interviewed one of his friends by the name of Blair. Oh boy. I don't care how to discipline Mackenzie as I did not prove reasonable doubt. I'm not a lawyer, but to take some classes in college. Her defense did nothing. Why are they fighting facts? Yeah, I know. Yeah, just listen. Wasn't that house under his mother's name? According to my sources, yes. Yes, she is. She's new on YouTube. Let's continue. Kizzy IRL. Troop says, okay. He says either Blair, something of that combination. Did you learn anything useful per investigation from the interview with Blair? He says no. Troop says, okay, tell us about your interview first with Angelo Russo. That blows my mind. Blair was his best friend and he has nothing to say. Okay, whatever. Troop says, okay, tell us about your interview first with Angelo. He says, Angelo's interview occurred after I interviewed the mother, Christine Russo, who told me he could shed more light on the relationship between Dominic and Mackenzie. So he came to the station accompanied by his mother. And the interview was, I began the interview by asking him to tell me about how long he had known Mackenzie. He said he had known her since eighth or ninth grade. He described their relationship, if I recall correctly, as kind of like a big brother, where she confided in him for various reasons. I asked about Mackenzie and Dominic's relationship. He said, when they fought, and I quote here, things did not take a healthy course, end quote. Throughout the course of the interview, Your Honor, he highlighted some instances where Dominic has been trying, specifically in July of 22, had been trying to end the relationship with Mackenzie. He alluded to threats being made that were substantiated, that were conveyed to him both by Mackenzie and Dominic separately. So each told him on separate occasions about some issue with their relationship and some threats that were being made. Troop says, did he say who was making threats to who? He said that Mackenzie was making threats to Dominic. That's interesting because we know Dom made threats to Kenzie too about going to expose her to her parents. And why can't people just be honest about both sides? Like, I don't like that. I don't. Mm, yeah, maybe Kenzie did it more, but still. Troop says, did he tell you anything about Dominic wishing to remove himself from this relationship? He says, yes. He said that Dominic wanted out and that he attempted in July to end the relationship on a couple occasions. Troop says, okay. And was that interview recorded on a video recording? He says, it was, Your Honor. I used my body camera. However, in all those instances, there could be a privacy concern. I would keep the video off so it's only audio recorded. Troop says, tell us about the interview with Miss Russo. He says, with Miss Russo, I was interested in that interview initially because of a comment that Miss Russo made subsequent to the crash about not believing it was OVI related. And I really wanted to probe into that. Hmm. Not the same Miss Russo that was twinning with her, right? Or is it the same one? So we interviewed Detective Glover and Miss Russo. Detective Glover and I. Okay, so it was Detective Glover and him in that shady interview. It's under my videos tab if you guys want to go watch it without no commentary. So we interviewed Detective Glover and I, Miss Russo, and that was the first question that I asked. And I remember Miss Russo telling me that at the cemetery she ran into Mackenzie and she asked her, or the conversation that came up of why didn't you call for a ride? Why didn't you call us? Mackenzie told Miss Russo, I quote, we weren't fucked up. Chip says, okay, so you followed up and interviewed Christine Russo. He says, yes. What was that also recorded? He says, yes. Chip says, okay. Jesus says, there was more to the conversation. I wanted to know about the resident situation, whether Mackenzie was living there. And Miss Russo did confirm that. And she further stated that Mackenzie even had a laundry at her house, not just Dominic's, but their two houses are next to each other, and that she had done laundry for her. And she says, I asked her about the relationship. She even shed some light on Dominic and how he's quiet and reserved person, not somebody who posted his life on social media. And so we went over a couple of incidents, one in particular that happened on July 17th. Tripp says, okay, tell us what you learned with the July 17th incident. He says, so on July 17th, 2022, Your Honor, Ms. Russo told us about an incident where Dominic called her and asked her to pick him up from out of the car that Mackenzie was operating, and they were somewhere on the roadway. This incident, there were text messages on Mackenzie's cell phone that substantiated the existence of that. Ms. Russo said that a friend of the family named Hench was actually the person who went to the scene and picked up Dominic and drove him home. So did we get records for Hench's phone? No, maybe they should have. Yeah. You would think that if they're going by hearsay, they would have pulled his cell phone records and seen that that call actually existed and that that event actually happened. Yeah, who are you talking to? Who are you asking if you're okay? Um, Mr. McDonald says objection. The court says objection to what? Mr. McDonald says to what Mr. Russo will say that Mr. Hench did or didn't do. Yeah, that's hearsay. I understand it's multiple levels of hearsay, but hearsay is allowed in a probable cause hearing. I'll overrule it. Well, that's not right. Steffi, if you don't agree respectfully, you don't have to be here. I don't believe a word Hench has to say, me either. After all the police reports that have come out on the Russos, respectfully, I don't believe what Hench has to say. Sorry. That's a conflict of interest. He did bail her. She did bail him out of jail. They refunded her the $900. There's proof of that on the court websites. Troop says, just for ease, we'll just discuss what Christine, well, he says Christina. So Troop, get it right. Told you, and then I'll ask you questions about what happened next. Troop says, or Jesus says, that's probably the court reporter. Okay, Miss Christine Russo said that Dominic wanted to be picked up from the interstate because Mackenzie was trying to crash the car. Okay, and did she tell you anything else about that event on 71? That a friend of the family picked up Dominic and drove him back to the house. Okay, a friend of the family's. Hench, right? Yes, Hench. Okay, and then you also interviewed Hench. I sure did. Okay, what did he tell you? He stated that he was directed by Miss Russo to pick up Dominic because of some altercation in a car with Mackenzie. Hmm. You call Hench, but not another family member? I'm just curious about that. Mr. Martin directly told me, Hench, that he called Dominic and he was on the phone with him trying to find out where they were. He was ultimately directed to Interstate 71. Mr. Martin, Hench, was on the phone with Dominic, told me that he overheard Mackenzie saying she's going to crash the car. At this point, Hench said when he pulled up to Mackenzie's car on I-71, he observed her striking Mr. Russo. Mr. Russo exited Mackenzie's vehicle, got into his car, and drove him back to his residence. Troop says, did you receive some video recordings that were made around that same time frame from the middle part of July? Okay, that's not the same thing. Same time frame is not the same thing as that incident. Did you receive some videos that Dominic had made of an interaction that he had with Mackenzie Shirilla? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Dominic Russo surreptitiously was using another person's phone, was on a phone call with Mackenzie. And whose phone he was using? You've been deep diving, you know. She was outside his house. He was using his cell phone and he was recording with his third party's phone. And we received 2 videos. Troop says, so I'm going to play you exhibit 68. Do you recognize that? He says, yes. Is this a recorded telephone call you just described to the court? He says, yes, sir. Troop says, detective, you reviewed 2 videos regarding this incident. I received 3. He says, okay. Oh, I'm sorry, received. Troop says, okay, I'm going to play for you State's Exhibit 69. Is that a fair and accurate depiction of one of the videos you received? He says, yes, sir. Troop says, you testified that you executed a search warrant on the cell phone belonging to Mackenzie Shirilla. He says, yes, sir. Did you find evidence on that cell phone pertinent to your investigation? He says, yes, sir. Okay. The court says, could you speak a little bit louder? Jesus says, yes, Your Honor. Troop says, in addition to the text messages that you've already related to the court that you used to corroborate the interaction on I-71 between Mackenzie and Dominic, did you find evidence of marijuana use? Jesus says, yes, sir. Troop says, please describe the evidence of MJ use that you found on Mackenzie's phone, please. Jesus says, so there was photos and video recordings of such that was not on the phone, but on the various social media accounts that we served search warrants for. Troop says, okay, give us an idea of how many of these, I don't know, photographs, videos, how much evidence of Mary Jane did you locate? He says, I can't put a number on it, sir. Gigabytes. I mean, there was a lot. Troop says, can you put a time period on the location of MJ or other rug use? Just to be clear, are you talking only about MJ? Jesus says there were photos of mushrooms, suspected MJ, some alcohol, and that's about it. What about all the lean photos? Because we know we saw those in a lot of the pictures from Snapchat and whatnot. What about all of those photos? Hmm. Who asked their attorney to pick up their phone from jail when they get locked up? Exactly. Who? Let's continue. He says, I didn't see anything like Coca-Cola or H or anything like that. You guys know what I mean by H. Troop says, over what time period? Jesus says, I believe we asked for, and I would have to look at the search warrant, but January 2020 or January 2022 until the time of the crash. Okay, I'm just going to show you several exhibits here. Tell me if you recognize them and what they depict. This is exhibit 84. Do you recognize this? Jesus says, yes, sir. What is exhibit 84? This is Mackenzie with the bong. Exhibit 85, the same thing with a lighter. Okay, we already know. So 86, 87, 88, 89 were pictures of Kenzie smoking. Question, what's Mackenzie doing on exhibit 90? She looks to be smoking in a vehicle. I don't know if you can see from the reflection of her glasses. You may or may not. I can't tell what seat she's in. Could be the driver's seat. Now that I've reviewed everything twice, like I don't think this should even be relevant because in the same videos where Kenzie's smoking, specifically when they were driving under a bridge or something, or maybe it wasn't a bridge. I thought it was over a bridge to go somewhere. We see them both smoking. Like they were always both smoking together. So that should have just been not relevant to this crash. Unless he probably was to get away. We can all agree he couldn't get rid of our stage 20 clinger. But if Dom really wanted to get away with from her, he could have done it. We've said this before, especially having a mom in the legal field. Like there's restraining orders. There's all type of things you can try to do. No, I don't believe that. They were both clinging to each other. Yeah, maybe Kenzie was a little more, but at the end of the day, he stayed with her for 4 years. Same thing here. Question, does exhibit 84 and exhibit 91 bear an accurate representation of types of materials you found on her cell phone? Jesus says yes. And there it says inaudible. And then his response is inaudible. Speak up. Troop says, okay, following the crash, were members of the community to just send various email communications containing photographs of Mackenzie? He says, yes, sir. Troop says, tell us about that. There was, Your Honor, screenshots from social media accounts that were accessible to the public that were emailed to us pre and post crash. So since the crash, there was, I believe, Halloween something that was sent to us, and there was a concert that Mackenzie attended. Mr. McDonald says, objection. This is all after the date of the accident. The court says, any response? Troop says it is after the date, but it goes to her state of mind and the lack of remorse that guides the detective in this investigation. He's still seeing these things are being sent to him, and it's surprising to him coming from someone who may have had an accident. The court says, overruled, you have an opportunity to cross-examine. Troop says, first detective, so do you recognize Dates Exhibit 75? He says, yes, sir. What is it? Jesus says, it's a screenshot of the GoFundMe page that was created for Mackenzie. Troop says, do you know how much money? Well, is that GoFundMe still active if you know? Jesus says, I don't know. Troop says, okay, when was the last time you knew it was active? He says, like when it first came out. That is not something I looked into. Troop says, State Exhibit 76. His response is, this is an Instagram message that was sent to me by Ms. Flanagan. It is a screenshot of a conversation with an accessory design company called Vitali, in which 2 responses were made, one from Natalie and Kenzie. Tripp says, are you able to read it from the witness stand? He says, no. Okay, so he goes up there. Tripp says, just read the top. And it says, we love the slick Mackenzie Shirilla on our website. Okay, so this is when the social media thing came up. We'll make sure you're credited. Apply to this comment with hashtag. If you use Natalie, hashtag community. Thank you for this amazing opportunity, her mother. She would love if you would use that. She's actually been trying to contact you for an audible, and that says email. It was a tragic accident, and she did not purposely mean to end any of her close friends' life. This is just as painful for her as it is for everybody else, or maybe even a little bit more painful. Kenzie Shola at hashtag community. Thank you for the comment. I would love to work with you guys. Such a great opportunity. Thank you. Troop says, detective, showing you exhibit 77. Do you recognize that? Jesus says, screenshots that were sent to us. Somewhere in the communication, it said Halloween 2022. Troop says, do you recognize the person depicted in the center of this photograph? He says, the center, it is Mackenzie. He says 78, also Mackenzie. 79, also Mackenzie. 80, also Mackenzie. 81, Mackenzie. 82, Mackenzie. Mackenzie's on the far right. 83, also on the far right. Troop says, do you know what Mackenzie dressed up for Halloween? Something called drank, which is supposedly an alcohol beverage mixed with something. Hazoo. Don't act dumb. Troop says, do you know the other two people in this photograph? He says, yes. In the center is Rosie and on the left is Nina. Okay, Nina is dressed as, and then it says inaudible for Halloween. Hazoo says, yep. Troop says, what is her inaudible? It says marijuana. Okay, do you recognize the name inaudible? It says it's one of the names on one of her social media accounts. When you say her, Hazoo says, I mean Mackenzie, Your Honor. Troop says, okay, one moment, please, Your Honor. Detective, I played 2 videos of Dominic recording Mackenzie outside of his residence. Do you know when those videos were made? He says, yes, sir. 7 of 21, 2022. I believe it was around 1800 hours to 6 p.m., give or take. Okay, how do you know that? Because Miss Russo brought these to us and we were able to track down the person whose phones they were captured on. And that gentleman, along with Miss Russo, came to the police station, showed us the actual video, and we were able to take a picture of the, if you click on the property of the video, it has the date, time, and stamps. So there's a lot of background that Kizzy has been talking about with the phone and the person who that belonged to. I'm not going to get into it here on this slide because we're reading transcripts, but the gentleman that came along with Miss Russo is also in the system, and I believe a convicted felon. If you click on the property video, it has, so again, why? They were trauma bonded to each other. So since Dom didn't cause the accident, he isn't being scrutinized much. If Kenzie and the tables were turned, he would be. That's why the focus more on Kenzie. He says, thank you. Chip says, one moment, please. That is suspicious as hell to me. The court says, sure. Question, what do you know about Dominic Russo? Hazoo says, Dominic Russo, from what I gathered, Your Honor, is a quiet young man, reserved, has a handful of friends, and his friends are very loyal to him. They spoke very highly of him. Business-oriented, a guy who had ambitions. Chip says, let me stop you. Has the Strongsville Police Department investigated Dominic for criminal activities? He says, we have had a couple of incidents with him. Yes. Okay, related to what? Family disputes. Have you ever investigated him for drug trafficking? He says, no. Okay, do you have any information that you're testifying about Dominic Russo being involved with drugs or trafficking? He says, yes. We've heard that, Miss Russo told me that he smokes marijuana. He has marijuana for an ankle injury, and, there are rumors. The court says he smokes marijuana with that car. Hazoo says, well, he consumes it. I don't know if he smokes it or edibles. I do know he consumes it. The problem that I have with this and the trial is because we know Miss Russo lied. She lied in that interview with the detectives, and she lied in this instance. You can't say that he only smokes Mary Jane, but then you see you're driving the vehicle where they're smoking, drinking, and then there's lean everywhere. Like, I thought you weren't supposed to be lying. Okay. How do you know that, Kay? Hey, Beth. That's what I have a problem with. And, there are rumors. Okay. He says, do you have contents of Mackenzie Shirilla's cell phone, correct? He says, I do. Troop says, I'll leave it at that. No further questions. Okay, here's the cross-examination of Hazoo. Facts. Yeah, remember all the Percocet thing? I'm going to take perks. He would make Kenzie upset when he would want to take perks, and Kenzie was always upset that he was wanting to take perks. Perks, I mean Percocet, another pharmacy item. And I'm not victim blaming, I'm not victim shaming. It's in the text and those should not be overlooked. It's all important. We've already read those numerous times. Let's continue. Cross-examination by Mr. McDonald. How long have we been live? Okay. And you guys know I'm not trying to be an evil person. I'm being realistic. All those kids and parents seem to not be honest with the cops. In this case, they were all hiding things for various reasons. That's what makes it frustrating. I thought if you lied in like police interviews, you could get in trouble for that. No? Oh, perjury is what it's called. Listen, we're starting 4th of July early here at Melly. Party time. What do I need to be looking at to see where? Hi, Alsani. Good to see you. If you guys are in the right channels, you will see it too. Who said, wait. Yeah, I know. I know. You're not evil. They're JS. Nobody's lying. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, where were you, Asani? Nobody's lying. The prosecutor asked you the question. Rumors about Dominic Russo. Jesus says yes. And I noticed that you didn't answer that, did you? Jesus says, I'm not following, sir. Yes, you are following. Saki. Troop says, very simple question. Did the prosecutor ask you if there were rumors about Dominic Russo? You just answered that 30 seconds ago, right? He says, yeah. McDonald says, and you said yes? Jesus says, there was. McDonald says, and then you shouldn't tell him what those rumors are, right? Jesus says, he didn't ask. McDonald says, I just asked you, what are those rumors? Jesus says, the rumors is that he sells marijuana to his buddies. McDonald says, what other rugs does he distribute? Possibly mushrooms. McDonald says, possibly mushrooms. Okay, and by the way, how old was Dominic Russo when he died? Jesus says 20. He says, how old is Mackenzie? 18 now. McDonald says 17 at the time, right? Jesus says, that is correct, sir. McDonald says, so 20, 19, 18, so a 4-year difference. When did they start dating? Jesus says, I believe according to Mr. Angelo Russo, sir, she was between 8th and 9th grade. That's around that time. I didn't really pay much attention to the age gap in the text. And I still don't judge that now so much because it's like, whatever, I dated older guys too. But now as I'm getting older, I don't know. I'm questioning things. Let me come up with my thought. Barbara Love, thank you for becoming a member. You are awesome. She sent the video she did with other girl a few weeks ago. Huh. Her cousin, I think. I agree. After that live a week or so, me and Green Eyed were in that night. I unsubbed for real. Did I put a pew pew up to your head and make you do it? No. And you're entitled to that. You are. Alexa, thank you for being here. I think the gap was a bigger deal when she was younger. Yeah, I do think it's a bigger deal as she was younger. 8th or 9th grade? I don't know. Let's talk about that in another live. He says, so McDonald says, so a senior in high school is dating an 8th grader, right? That's the math. Jesus says, could be a freshman. He says, okay, so you're gonna at least, because in your words that you said at least 15 times, you want to be fair. Jesus says, I do. McDonald says, an 8th grader dating a senior in high school. Is that right? He says, I don't know. I don't know if she was in 8th grade. McDonald says, you don't know that, right? Jesus says, I don't know if she was in 8th grade. McDonald says, you want to be fair, right? Jesus says, I do. McDonald says, okay, so if you wanted to be fair, why didn't you just tell the judge about the statements, the actual statement that Officer Doyle made that completely contradicts what you just testified here in court today? Jesus says, Your Honor, Sergeant Doyle was deemed to be chopping it up with the officers. The court says, seemed to be what? Jesus says he was chopping it up. He was having a conversation with the officers. When I demanded a statement from him to be fair, I demanded a written statement and I requested an interview to do both because I wanted to get to the bottom of what was exactly said. I didn't just state the Strongsville police officer word on its face. I went, I got a statement from him and I interviewed him at Metro in the presence of his lieutenant, and I referred him to Mr. Troop to further investigate the matter. I gave all this documentation to Troop saying, here's what two Strongsville officers had to say. Here's what the sergeant is saying, how he backed out. Here's everything I have on it. He backed out. He says, so I did look into it. McDonald said, my question was wasn't why didn't you look into it? My question was, why didn't you tell the judge that because you made it sound as if this poor girl's father said she committed a crime? Why didn't you do that? Jesus says, Your Honor, because I am answering based on the questions being asked. I don't have an open courtroom here to just tell a story, but if you want, I'm more than happy to. I am answering specifically what I'm being asked. Had a follow-up question led me there, I would have given it to you. I'm not concealing it. It's in my report. He says, let's get your report. Jesus says, sure. McDonald says, would you tell us exactly what the only information you know Detective Doyle said? Jesus says, sure. McDonald says, get your report and read it. Jesus says, give me my report. McDonald says, getting it from the prosecutor. Jesus says, thank you very much. The court says, is that exhibit 100? McDonald said, it's one of them. I don't know. It's their exhibit 100. Jesus says, thank you. McDonald says, it might be after page 60 or somewhere thereafter. Jesus says, you got it. Give me 1 second, please. McDonald says, yes, sir. Just trying to help. Jesus says, I appreciate you. Here we go. So do you want me to read or just explain, or do you want to ask questions? McDonald says, I want you to do what I asked you to do. Jesus says, sure. McDonald says, I want you to read the statement that the Sergeant Doyle emailed to you because that's the only communication you've had with him, right? Jesus says, this is the email, Your Honor. August 13th, 2022. At approximately 1849 hours, officers were dispatched to 7A for the disturbance coming from Mackenzie Shirilla's room. When officers arrived, Mackenzie was upset with her dad and wanted him out of the room. At that time, officers spoke to Mr. Shirilla out in the hallway, and he was visibly upset and crying about his daughter and proceeded to tell us she was in a crash that two of her friends died in. He didn't state how the crash occurred, nor did I ask. I was just trying to get him to calm down. At one point in our conversation, he stated he thinks his daughter needed a psych eval because she wasn't making sound decisions because she wanted to leave the hospital and go to her friend's funeral. I had him sit in the waiting area to calm down. That was the end of my interaction with Mr. Shirilla. McDonald says, would you agree that the statement is 180 degrees different than what you testified to on direct examination? Jesus says, what I testified to is what officers who heard him, who were told by him, told me in their statement. Okay. McDonald says, so my question again, is that email a direct contradiction of what you told this judge? Jesus says, what I told you, Your Honor, is that there were 3 officers, 2 different stories, and that's what I'm telling you. That's what the Strongsville officer said. This is what the Metro Sergeant is saying. I'm just telling you that we documented, and that was what we documented and was reported. I wasn't there. McDonald said, in the rumors about Dominic Russo, you just left out. I have to sneeze. Hold on. Thank you, Sarah, for gifting a membership. Who got it? Let me see if my thing is backed up. I can't see who got it yet. Bless you. Thank you. Oh, okay. That was Crystal. Crystal got it? Oh, no. She said something. Her birthday wasn't too long after the crash. I thought sister said it was 2 year and a couple months age gap, almost 3 years. Apparently it wasn't. according to this. Sorry, I'm trying to see. Oh, Ivy got it. Okay, good. Welcome, Ivy, to members. Thank you, Sarah. Again, you're very kind. Is there rumors about Dominic Russo that you also left out or omitted the fact that there has also been some rumors that he's been investigated for possession of weapons by your department, correct? Weapons. We do know about that because we've heard about them in the text messages. He says that's the first time hearing of it, Jesus says. Oh, brother. McDonald says, you're sure? Jesus says, I'm positive. That's a damn lie, in my opinion. McDonald says, okay, now you said that you consulted the county prosecutor's office within a couple of days of this accident. He says, day one. McDonald says, day one, and you've been collaborating with them in this investigation from day one. Jesus says, yes. McDonald says, you also received a call from me. Jesus says, I did. McDonald said, I told you I represented her. Jesus says, yes, sir. McDonald says, told you we're going to arrest her. Please call me. Jesus says, yes, sir. And you chose not to do that. Jesus says, no, sir. Okay, now. Jesus says, no, as in you're wrong. But yes, keep going. McDonald says, I asked you to contact me before you arrest her. I asked you that. Jesus says, I don't recall that. McDonald says, you certainly didn't call me before you arrested her, did you? Jesus says, I left you a voicemail and I remember that exact day. And I know where I was because my brother was in town and I was off. I took your voicemail on my day off, returned your call on my day off. McDonald said, and what was your day off? He said it was sometime in September when my brother from Israel was in town and we were in Aurora at those malls over there. McDonald said, okay, we ultimately talked, but that's not what I'm talking about the day you arrested her. Do you remember what day that was? He says, I do, November 4th, and you told me you were displeased. McDonald says, certainly, because I asked you to do it, right? Jesus says, no, because the decision was above my pay grade. I was not the one who made the decision on how to arrest Mackenzie. McDonald said, somebody did. Jesus says, yes, sir. McDonald says, since it was above your pay grade, did you agree with the way it was done? Jesus says, sir, do you think I have what it takes to go to Mr. John Costco and tell him I'm not going to do this? John Costco. Question. That's not my question, says McDonald. Well, I'm answering your question. Ooh, I feel a little bit of hostility here in the courtroom. McDonald said, my question is really simple. Yes or no? Did you agree with what was done? Jesus says, yes. McDonald says, okay. Jesus says, I'm at the bottom of the totem pole. When Mr. Mike O'Malley and Mr. Costco? Not Costco, the store. Costco? And Mr. Troop make decisions. Who am I to say? McDonald says, why didn't you arrest her at her house? Jesus said, that's what I wanted. McDonald said, I didn't ask you. Why didn't you arrest her at her house? Jesus says, they wanted her on a traffic stop. McDonald said, was it a real traffic stop? Jesus says, well, it was for an expired license plate. McDonald says, so you were told to arrest this person for a traffic stop when at the time you gained this information, there was no violation, right? Jesus said, I was in court. There was a traffic violation. I was in court right here in this building when the warrant was issued. At what time the officers, based on recommendation from the prosecutor's office, was to make the arrest during a traffic stop to obtain her cell phone in an attempt to get the phone into police possession again. McDonald says, and you arrested her on the highway. Jesus says, I did not. I was driving there. Yes. So she was arrested on the highway. Jesus says, Strongsville police she had a therapy appointment and they worked with Broadway Heights police who pulled her over for expired plates in a Honda Pilot. McDonald said, on the highway. That's what I asked. Jesus says, yes, on I-77. McDonald said, certainly more dangerous than arresting her at home, but above your pay grade. Jesus said, sir, 100% all day. McDonald said, now to be fair, you talked about a GoFundMe page and said that that was some proof. What was that proof of? Jesus said, nothing. There was a GoFundMe page. McDonald said, but you were asked about it. Jesus says, that's a question for Mr. Troop. McDonald said, is there any significance of that to you? Jesus says, funeral cost? To me, I didn't look into it. There was nothing suspicious to it. The two deceased victim and Miss Shirilla, McDonald said, I'm just asking you what the significance is of that piece of paper to the charge of aggravated murder or murder. Jesus said, there's none. McDonald said, there's none. So we'll just agree it has nothing to do with it. Jesus says, yeah. McDonald said, just like that, just like the fact that the Russos, well, aided by Blair, set up a GoFundMe page for in loving memory of Dominic with the picture of Mackenzie, right? Jesus says, okay. McDonald says, right? He says, yeah. Okay, you'll agree that that happened. The court said, is that an exhibit? McDonald says, no, I'm just asking, right? Jesus says, I guess. McDonald says, now to be fair. Jesus says, I don't know who put the picture up, so I'm not saying Mr. Thomas put it up or he created that account. I didn't look into the GoFundMe. That's not within the scope of my investigation. Okay, then why bring up Kenzie's GoFundMe? I'm confused if it's not within the scope of your investigation. What are you talking about, Kelly? These are transcripts. Do you think I just made these up? You mean to the trial? Yeah. Age cap was too big, especially with how immature Kenzie was. Seems like her parents wanted her out of the house and Dom took her out of their hair for a while. Hey, Odin. McDonald says, but you admitted it in as evidence. He says, I did not. McDonald says, how many times have you talked with anyone from the coroner's office? Jesus says, a couple times. Didn't I email them? McDonald says, you're being very precise. So let's be precise. Jesus says, I emailed them to request the autopsy. McDonald says, so you sent something. Jesus says, sure. McDonald says, but you didn't talk with them or videotape with them. Jesus says, and then Dr. Apolonio, I had a call with Dr. A. McDonald said, when was that? Jesus says, I'd have to look at my report. McDonald says, okay, I'll give you your report. You can refresh your memory. Jesus says, appreciate it. Do you happen to know the page? He says, I don't. I'm sorry. Or McDonald says, I don't. I'm sorry. Jesus says, okay, I might be a minute. Hold on. McDonald says, if it helps you, Dr. Bard provided you Davion Flanagan's inaudible of September 12th of 2022, if that helps. Jesus says, okay, here we go. So we have a couple here. McDonald said, okay. Jesus says, I called August 11th at 8:43. I called Dr. A at the request of lab technician Jason. And that's when I turned over the two. McDonald says, all right. Jesus says, okay, he wasn't there. Okay. McDonald says, okay. Jesus says, so he called me back at some point, and that's what we need to find out. McDonald said, it was before you received the coroner's report, right? Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, okay. And other than that, you had no contact with the coroner, right? Jesus says, I don't remember if there was. I mean, no, we did because I talked to Dr. A, so he returned my call at some point. McDonald said, yes. But then my question was, he returned your phone call before you actually received the autopsy report. You said, Jesus says, you have to look at the dates, I suppose. What dates do you have for the autopsy? McDonald said, September 12th, 2022. Jesus said, so it was inaudible. So it was, and then it's inaudible what he's saying. The day it was signed. The same day, both of them. Hold on. September 12th. No, I'm not seeing it. It's got to be earlier than September 12th, says Jesus. McDonald said, okay, so on September 12th, you received the report. You testified about 2 pages of the report. Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, but in fact, there's a 1-page report autopsy. Jesus says, McDonald said, and then 1 to 4 pages included the gross anatomic description, right? Jesus says, yes. McDonald says, and then on the last page, page 4 of 4, they make a ruling as to the death of manner, correct? Jesus said, yes. McDonald said, and what was the manner of death? Jesus says, accidental. McDonald says, accidental? Jesus says, yes. When did you go back? So they ruled it accidental, right? Jesus says, The court said, this is for Mr. Flanagan. McDonald said, this is for Mr. Flanagan. McDonald said, is it the same for Mr. Russo? He says, that is true. McDonald said, so why did you go back and talk to the coroners and tell them that it wasn't an accident? Wow. Jesus says, I talked with the prosecutor. McDonald said, as far as you know, Jesus says, I reported to the prosecutor the discrepancy and that the coroner report stated accidental, not homicide. McDonald said, right. Jesus said, I made that clear to Mr. Troop. McDonald said, and you made that clear because that's a huge problem in your mind, isn't it? Jesus says, to me, it stood out. Yes, it stood out. McDonald said, it stood out like, wow. The court said, what date was made? Mr. McDonald said, September 12th. Jesus says, well, I've got to look through this, but not this. That's when they emailed it to me. When did I write in here is what I'm trying to look for. But at the time when this report was, when the autopsy was completed, we hadn't shifted into the homicide investigation. They were deceased in the car crash. And so that was that. So that's what was, the court says, but whether your investigation is into homicide or not, why does that have a bearing on what the medical examiner's ruling is? Jesus says, we work independently. He made his determination and then our scope shifted from, okay, it's a crash. Now we have elements that went beyond just an accidental motor vehicle incident. So they had the EDR information is what I'm understanding. And they change it. The court says that contained information that needed to be provided to the medical examiner's office. Jesus says, no, he did his thing, we did our thing, but the medical examiner in his documentation wrote it's accidental. And I told the prosecutor that, hey, this is what we're investigating. This is not what the medical examiner said. McDonald says, so to recap, you agree, right? That it says, Jesus says, it's on the last page. McDonald says, right. Okay. And you thought, whoa, that's a problem, right? Jesus says, enough that I brought it to the prosecutor's attention. McDonald said, okay, well, I guess I'm going to get, and then it's inaudible. Where's the prior calculation and design? Then it says audible, testify to it. But where is it? Jesus says, okay, so the vehicle, we eliminated that there was a mechanical problem with the vehicle. We eliminated that there was a medical problem with the car. Medical problem with the car? Oh, he says medical problem with Mackenzie. And so at this point, we looked at the speed, the factors based on everything that we have from the reconstructionist. Given the circumstances, and they said, given the speed and the 100% acceleration, no braking with the distance at which there was time to attempt to stop the car, attempt to throw the car neutral, something to that effect, that shows they drove towards, she drove towards the building. McDonald said that she tried to kill herself. Jesus said, that's a question for her. McDonald said, no, actually, that's a question for, Jesus said, whether she was trying to unalive herself or unalive them, I mean, I can't speculate. We can throw out theories, but McDonald said, right. And in attempting to do those theories, you talk to numerous people about unaliving oneself, right? Jesus says, I did look into it. Sure. McDonald said, and you learned that in fact, she was not trying to unalive herself, right? The big S word. Jesus says, not necessarily. McDonald said, okay, well, back up. You spoke with Paul, right? He says, yes. Paul is the guy's house they were out that night. McDonald said, yes. He didn't think it was a suicide. Jesus says, he did not know. You talked to Landon. Jesus said, yes. He didn't think it was that. Jesus said, okay. McDonald said, you agree. Jesus says, yeah, I agree with that. And you talked to Tom. Jesus says, yes. And he told you it was not a suicide. Jesus says, Tom was very different interview. I don't think his statement to be credible, but Angela Russo and Miss Christine Russo said otherwise. Thank you, Evie. Love and appreciate you. Evie says, we can agree to disagree, but still here to support our Melly. Thank you, Evie. You're awesome. I have a problem with this. McDonald says, and Tyler with the transcript and what's being said here, because I don't find Ms. Russo was credible. And I mean that respectfully. She said, or maybe she wasn't aware, but she said she didn't know that Dom was doing other stuff. And now we've seen videos that she did. She says that Dom didn't have mental health problems, but Dom said many times in his text messages that he has been suffering with bipolar disorder. And he brings it up a lot in the text messages. So I'm lost at that part. McDonald said, and Tyler Croy told you they weren't trying to unalive themselves. Jesus says, but Deanna did, which is Tyler Proctor's mom, Kenzie's ex, which, how would she know? Tyler and Kenzie dating was in the past. But anyways, McDonald says, are you referring to just Mackenzie in your questions or the other occupants in the car? Says the court. McDonald said, just Mackenzie. The court says, okay. Jesus says, so for every person who said they weren't, there was somebody on the opposite side who said that they could be. Says Jesus. I have to sneeze again. Sorry, I don't like to sneeze in your ear. Jesus said, so for every person who said they weren't, there was somebody on the opposite side who said they could be. McDonald said, who said that could be? Jesus says, I have to look at exactly who said she was and who said she was not. The Russos, Diana, Tyler, the ex, and there was people who said she was. McDonald said that she was trying to unalive herself. Jesus says that she made threats to unalive herself. In fact, Deanna said that she made threats to unalive herself and Dominic. Okay, but where is that proof? Is there text messages of Kenzie doing that to her specifically? Because if they were in this trial or in these docs, I must have missed that, or I don't remember. So correct me if I'm wrong. McDonald said, who was that person? Jesus says she's the mother of her ex-boyfriend. McDonald said, ex-boyfriend from how long ago? Then it says inaudible. Jesus said, not necessarily. He said they were on and off. McDonald said, I thought you said that Dominic and Mackenzie dated for years. Ah, that's where I'm questioning. Jesus said, yes, but there are some complicated circumstances that were reported. Reported by who? McDonald says, and Mr. Houston also said it wasn't S. Jesus says, I don't recall that one. McDonald said, well, let's go get your report. Jesus says, what page? McDonald says, well, see, Jesus says, I know Mr. Houston came with Mr. Croy on the first day, and so it's possible. McDonald said, that was back on 8/1. You interviewed Houston. Jesus said, I did not. McDonald said, somebody did. Jesus said, it wasn't me. He provided a written statement. McDonald said, let's be straight. Jesus said, McDonald said, you're testifying not only to what you did on direct examination, but the entire report, right? Jesus says, right. McDonald said, and you reviewed this report, correct? Jesus says, sure, absolutely. McDonald said, on August 1st, Jesus says, yes, right here. McDonald said, interviewed with Houston. Jesus said, it said statement. He provided a statement. Okay, and he said that Mackenzie and Russo were fighting at the time of the crash and Ruggs were involved. Jesus said, that's what he wrote. McDonald said, that's what he wrote. Houston said, that's what Houston said. Jesus said, it's in a written statement that's on file. McDonald said, then you interviewed on August 9th, or someone did, Kelly. Jesus said, yes, Kelly. I interviewed her personally. McDonald said, and she thought Mackenzie, Dom, and Davion were tripping, right? Jesus said, that's not exactly what she said. She said they were at her house for a graduation get-together, and Mackenzie reportedly asked her if she wanted a trip. McDonald said, so they were talking about tripping. Jesus said, McDonald says, okay. And that interview with Kelly, also she mentioned the Dominic text of I love you, right? Jesus says, the next I love you, yes, there were, McDonald said on August 9th. Jesus says, okay, one moment. The court says, wait, say that again? Jesus says, yes. The court says, state the question again. McDonald says on August 9th, and then it says, you, inaudible, told Kelly she gave you information about some of Dominic's texts. Jesus said, McDonald said, that included the quote, I love you. Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, who sent that quote? Jesus says, so supposedly Dominic texted at least one friend and family member saying, I love you, and I tracked those people down. McDonald said, and texted them, I love you when? Jesus says that the night that 7/31/2022, that night when they were at Paul's residence. McDonald said, and that was unusual for him to do that, right? Jesus said, no, this is not what I was told. McDonald said, and you interviewed on August 11th, Paul, that you mentioned. Jesus said, sure, yes, that is correct. McDonald said, he told you that they talked about mushrooms. Jesus says, yes. McDonald says, he told you that Mackenzie was devastated by the loss of Dominic. Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, right? Jesus says, he mentioned that. McDonald said, he said there was no talk of suicide, right? Jesus said, yes. McDonald said, and he said that Mackenzie was a bad driver? Jesus said, yes, he did talk about that. McDonald said, and in fact, you have neglected so far to mention that in your report. I think it was Detective Glover, in going through Mackenzie's text messages, social media, etc., found 136 instances of bad driving. He used the word reckless driving, right? Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, okay, 136. Jesus says, not 136 events. No, that's not it. 136 files in a file on the hard drive that had something to do with either driving or reckless behavior. But I would have to pull up the actual network folder and tell you what each folder is. McDonald said, okay, but the court said, wait, that's in like Strongsville Police Department. I'm confused. Jesus says, from her social media, Your Honor. Do you want me to explain? McDonald said, sure. Jesus said, okay, so pursuant to search warrant for her Snapchat and her social media, I asked Detective Glover, who at the time was investigating a separate part of this case, to go through social media. Okay, so the DEA agent. And because there was so much content, I had him break it down in folders for me. And one of them was the reckless piece, the driving and the reckless behavior. And so whatever photos he would find that pertain to that category, he would just drop them in there. McDonald said, and he provided you that and made a report of 136 videos or photos that he said were examples of reckless or distracted driving by Mackenzie, right? Jesus says, I would have to look, but sounds in that area. McDonald says, okay. Jesus says, but it doesn't mean 136 events. I got to be clear here. McDonald said, but we'll agree it's a lot, whatever the number is. Jesus says, relative. McDonald says, sure, as it relates to, I can't remember what exhibit it was, but you were shown on the second office. You were shown the second officer responding to the scene. Jesus says, yes, Officer Robinson. McDonald says, and you played, I think it was a minute of his body, well, a minute driving down and then another maybe minute as he approached, right? Jesus says, yes. McDonald says, when he approached the car, you could see him open both doors on the driver's side. Jesus says, they were still trying to gain entry. Yes. McDonald said, but they did gain entry. Jesus says, yes, they did. Eventually, yes. McDonald says, and as soon as they gained entry through the rear driver's side door, it was apparent that there was no body in the back at all. Jesus says, no, that's not correct. Mr. Flanagan's body was, his lower half was, so I would have to draw this. So if this is a car, Mr. Russo's body was in the front passenger seat. Mr. Flanagan's body, his lower bottom was towards the driver's side passenger area. Okay. The court says, wait, okay. Jesus says, I've got to draw it. It would be easier. So part of his body post impact was over Mr. Russo, and the rest of his body was still in the passenger seat. So a part of him was still in the passenger rear. You'd have to pull up the body cam. You can see it. McDonald says, okay, we had someone from Strongsville Fire Department testify, right? Jesus says, no, Berea Fire Department. McDonald says, you reviewed the Strongsville Fire Department. Jesus says, I looked at it. Yes, sir. He says, and if you look on page 2, does it tell you where everyone was situated? Jesus says, M1 handled first extricated male, pulse felt by crew on scene. M1, that's medic 1, moved patient back to medic 1, the ambulance. An assessment found patient to have injuries incompatible with life, pronounced dead on scene. Second, entrapped patient pronounced dead at the scene and left inside vehicle. Extrication to the passenger door so coroner could pick up the body. McDonald said, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and the judge can go and review that exhibit to see where Davion's body was, right? Jesus says, yes, the body cam. McDonald says, right, but you're saying it wasn't on the front passenger seat. Jesus says Mr. Flanagan's body was not fully on top of Mr. Russo. McDonald said, not fully, but Jesus says part of his body was still in the rear area. McDonald said, but part of his body was in the front? Jesus says, yeah. The court says, like his head and everything was in the front part, and then his lower half of his body was. Jesus says, yes. The court says, like through the center console. He says, yes. The court says, like through the two front seats. Jesus says, on the side, well, the seat collapsed that Mr. Russo was sitting on. The court says, got it. He says, the seat was broke. The seat broke, and so Mr. Russo's upper half was also in the rear passenger seat. His head was out the window. The court says, because the top part of his seat, you mean like your back against, had snapped? Jesus says, snapped, and so Mr. Russo was on the back, and Mr. Flanagan's body was contorted in such a way. The court says, got it. McDonald said, and so as the judge said, Mr. Flanagan was in the back seat, the top half of his body in the front. Jesus said, I'm sorry, sir. You have to slow down and repeat so I can visualize what you're saying. Then Troop jumps in and says, Your Honor, I have a photograph of exactly what they're talking about if it can help clear it up. It's from the body camera. It's a screenshot. McDonald says something, do it, and I'll just ask some other questions. The witness says, do you mind if I get water? The court says, yes. Mackenzie, Shirilla says, is that going to be showed? The court says, Mackenzie, do you need more water? She says, yes, please. Is that going to be showed? The court says, it's just a photo, right? Mackenzie said, it's like, and then it's an audible. The court says, you need more water? Mackenzie said, thank you so much. Mr. McDonald said, it's so interestingly, this Life 360 app, you learned a lot of information from that, didn't you? Jesus says, not a lot, just, well, that's a lie because you had just said that you based all the other information off of that. This is wild. Maybe she is guilty of something else. Honestly, I don't know anymore. If there's that much reasonable doubt, there's a problem here. For reals. He says, not a lot, just the court says, I'm sorry, this is exhibit 101. You said, Troop says 101. Yes, I'm sorry. The court says, that's okay. McDonald says, you learned some information. Jesus says, some information. Yes, sir. McDonald said, confirm the speed. Jesus says, ballpark. McDonald said, ballpark. It is also confirmed what time they left the place. Paul's house. Jesus said, yes, sir. McDonald said, until the time of the accident. Jesus says, yes, sir. McDonald said, and it also showed the route they took to get there. Jesus says, yes, sir. McDonald says, and it told times, right? Jesus says, yes, sir. I guess what Jesus says, sir, they were not accurate times, okay? So I'm not being held to, Dom says, all right, oh my God, not Dom, my bad. McDonald says, all right, well, you did testify on direct about the text that Davion received, correct? Wait, what does he mean by they were not accurate times? He says, no, I was not asked. McDonald said, I got it. I didn't ask if you were asked. I said, you didn't testify about it, right? Davion did receive a text. Jesus says, no. A photograph? Jesus says, no. What did he receive? Jesus says, he did not. That photograph he received was at 4:12 in the morning. McDonald said, 4:12 in the morning? Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, okay, so he received one, right? Jesus says, yes. Okay, I misunderstood. I thought you were, McDonald said, during that time period. Jesus says, yeah, thank you. He received a text. The court says, this is on July 31st. McDonald says, this is on the day in the morning, 4:12 a.m. He receives a text. Jesus says, yes. McDonald says, you don't know when he opened it? Jesus says, no, I don't. McDonald said, okay, but do you know what was in that text? Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, what? He said, a photograph. McDonald says, from who? Jesus says, from Tyler Croy. And who's Tyler Croy? A friend of Mr. Flanagan. Okay, and what was it a photograph of? Jesus says, inaudible sunset. He was in Colorado, I believe. McDonald says, a pretty picture of the sunset in Colorado, right? Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, none of us were in that car. You weren't, I wasn't. Mackenzie's the only one, and she consistently said she doesn't remember what happened, right? Jesus said, if you say so. McDonald said, to you guys. Jesus says, I don't know, Your Honor. I never asked her that. McDonald said, and isn't it consistent with someone getting a picture, trying to get up and show everybody the picture of a beautiful sunrise? Jesus says, no. McDonald said, oh, you don't believe that's possible? Jesus says, no. You know why, Your Honor? At 5:30, give or take, he replied to that photo. McDonald says, okay. Jesus says, so at 5:30 in the morning, he replied to that photo. McDonald said, right. Jesus says, okay. McDonald said, and then what time was the crash? Jesus says, the crash was within that time. If I may add that Mr. Flanagan's cell phone did not sustain any damage compared to Mr. Russo's that was completely smashed. McDonald said, but at that point is within 30 seconds of the crash, a minute of the crash. Jesus says, I don't know that. What? McDonald says, well, you do know that from his phone, you just said. Jesus says, I told you I can't nail down the time. I don't know if those times are in sync, Your Honor, just like the court says, what times? Jesus says, the times from Snapchat. What time Life 360 sent those words? I can't sync those. The court says, but wouldn't you know what time the crash was based on the video surveillance by talking to the people that you obtained from the video? Jesus says, no. What? So the video surveillance, the city of Strongsville camera was 534. Test oil, there was a discrepancy in time that we cleared up, but I don't know if the applications, if they were in sync with the city camera. The court says, not asking about the applications. Jesus says, right. Well, when he replied, the court says he's trying to compare the time that he responded to the photo, which is in a cell phone, which is probably accurate time, right? 5:30, he responded to that. Jesus says, sure. McDonald says 5:31. The court says, okay. Jesus says, I would have to go look at it, give or take. The court says, were you able to verify what time the city cameras, do you have an accurate timestamp on him? Jesus says, I don't know that. The court says, do the buildings where you obtained the video surveillance from what we've seen throughout the course of this hearing, are the timestamps on their accurate times? Jesus says, they're out of sync with the city camera. The court says, that's not my question. Jesus says, okay. The court says, were you able to verify whether the timestamps on those videos from the buildings, not the city camera, the buildings that you obtained video from, were these accurate timestamps? Jesus says, what do you mean by accurate, Your Honor? I mean, compared to what? They were, yes. The court says, in speaking to those business owners, do you believe, and then it says inaudible. Jesus says, yeah, 4 minutes, 20 seconds off. 4 minutes and 20 seconds off from the test oil itself. The camera of the crash is 4 minutes and 20 seconds off. The court said, of what? Jesus says, off the time that is provided on the cell phones. The court says, okay. Jesus says, the witness, Jesus says, okay, the detective verified that and he generated a memo with it clarifying the discrepancy. McDonald said, the point is Davion is texting while in the car a short time before the accident. Jesus says, I believe so. McDonald said, and there's a nice picture there. Jesus says, I believe so, yes. McDonald said that some people would want to share, right? Jesus says, okay. McDonald said, so the prosecutor in their opening statement said that this was about Mackenzie being a domestic abuser. Is that your theory? Jesus says, I don't have a theory. I believe there's multiple sides to the story. Wow, finally, Jesus, we agree. There's Mackenzie's side, there's Dominic's side, and then all of the friends. Well, there's actually 4, and then the actual truth. Dominic's not here to tell us, and Mackenzie wouldn't talk, and the friends, it depends on what side you talk to. McDonald said, so who knows? He says, I cannot under oath say one way or the other. It could be, McDonald said, okay, I appreciate that. Jesus said, I can't do that. McDonald said, to be fair, that 7 to 20 video that you showed of the 21 and 17-year-old bickering back and forth, that was just bickering back and forth, right? Jesus says, no. McDonald said, no. Jesus said, no, because in talking with family and friends, and talking with the friends, there was a lot of fighting. They fought, and some of those fights did get, the court says, answer the question he's asking. McDonald said, yes, I would ask you to answer my question. Jesus says, okay. McDonald said, the question was, on the July 20th, 22 video, Dominic was inside the house, Mackenzie outside. Jesus says, okay. McDonald said, that was a 21-year-old and a 17-year-old bickering, right? Jesus said, I don't think it's bickering. I think it's more than bickering. McDonald said, okay, well, tell me what crime you would have charged either of them with based on what happened on 7/20. He said, I wasn't there. Possibly trespass, criminal trespass. McDonald said, well, just so you know, police officers usually aren't present. Jesus says, right. McDonald said, let me finish. At the scene of a crime, they often make rulings. So that's not a good excuse for not answering the question. Whoa. Jesus says criminal trespass, possible criminal damaging, maybe vandalism, maybe if she did attempt burglary for attempting to break into the house. Dominic, or I keep saying Dominic. McDonald says where she lived. Jesus said, well, did she live there? I mean, she said she lived there, but her Ohio BMV, no, we know she lived there, Jesus. Quit bullshitting. Miss Russo even said so. The court says, you testified that she lived there. McDonald said, you and Christine Russo said she lived there. Come on. Jesus says, okay. McDonald says, don't play games. Jesus says, I'm not playing games. McDonald says, yes, you are. Jesus says, okay. McDonald says, so it's none of those crimes if she's living there and you were told she lives there, right? Jesus says, I don't know if I cannot say conclusively one way or the other. McDonald said, Christine Russo did absolutely nothing that you're aware of to have this 89 to 90 pound domestically abused person move back to her parents, did she? That's what I said earlier. She could have found a way to separate them if she really wanted to. Wow. So many unanswered questions. Yo. He says, Jesus says, I don't know. That's a question for Miss Russo. McDonald said, well, you talked to her. Jesus says, I did, but the issue is we were talking about the crash. There were instances where Miss Russo did ask her to leave, yes. And there were instances where it's on text messages, so she did. McDonald said, and speaking of the second incident that you use on video is a July 17th incident. Jesus says, on the interstate. McDonald said, and in fact, you're aware that Mackenzie said Rosie's text messages about how Dominic started it, right? Jesus says, yes. So Dominic started that fight. What? Why did I forget about that? McDonald says, okay, and you're also aware that Mackenzie texted to Christine Russo about the incident, correct? That's what I said earlier. That incident where Hench says, oh, she's going to crash the car. I don't believe it for a second. I really don't. That's just my opinion. That's wild. Jesus says, that's correct. Yes. McDonald said, and Christine Russo, what did she tell in a text? Not what she told you, but what did she say in the text about this July 17th? Jesus says, I would have to look at her message. McDonald said, okay. Jesus says, do you want me to look? McDonald said, absolutely. Jesus says, you got it. He says, McDonald said, it's getting a little scattered here, but I'll try to find it to help you a little bit. Jesus says, I appreciate it. Okay, I found it. McDonald says, okay. He says, I got it. McDonald said, so read the entire text chain. Jesus says, from the 17th or all of the chains that McDonald says, no, just on the 17th. The court says, these are texts with who? McDonald says, between Russo and my client, Christine. So Christine and Miss Russo and Kenzie. Jesus says, yes, it's dated 7/17 at 12:45 hours, so that's 12:45 p.m. Mackenzie says, can you come get Dom? He just grabbed my steering wheel on the highway trying to spin my car out and hurt me. McDonald said, and that's Mackenzie saying that. Yes, that's Mackenzie stating it. To who? To Christine now. McDonald said, okay. Jesus said, Mackenzie also, I'm scared to drive because it's raining, so I just need him to get picked up. If he doesn't get out of my car, I'm calling my dad, so please come get him out. Miss Russo says, Hench is on the way, calm down for OW lease. And then she says, please. Mackenzie says, to be honest, I can't calm down when he just tried to end my life. Then he lied to you about it. Miss Russo says, I'm just trying to diffuse for now. I'm not mad at anyone. Mackenzie said, I don't think he's capable of that when he keeps telling me to shut up and duct tape my mouth. Mackenzie says, I don't feel safe. He's also threatening to blackmail me to my mom. He's not getting out. He also blocked me, so I can't pick up any of my belongings at his house. I hope this is a learning experience from him on what not to do with women, because I really don't think he knows how to treat them at all. Miss Russo says, stop the fighting and stop the lying. When he gets his things, you can get yours. Mackenzie said, first of all, I am not lying about anything. Maybe you shouldn't take his word so seriously. You don't know how he treats me behind closed doors. And this statement is so important. Wait, what? This is like important to me. I don't believe Kenzie picked this fight on that day. I really don't. I really don't. And how much stuff has been covered up, I don't believe that. And this is true. We judge her based off her social media posts and the text messages, but we only see that one part of all of it. We don't know what was going on with them physically in person every single day behind closed doors. That is true about any and all relationships. Mackenzie says it's never okay to try to end somebody's life or put their hands on people. Russo says no one should touch anyone. No fighting in the car for sure. He never put his hands on you. Mackenzie says, you need to tell him that. He tried to end my life today and told me, do you want to die? I almost hit the wall and I could have died. Russo says, you haven't blackmailed him with the cops 100 times. And that ends the text exchange. McDonald said, okay. Jesus says, do you want this? The court says, are you introducing those? Is that it? He says, nope, just the actual testimony itself. McDonald says, you were shown some photographs, exhibit 77 through, I can't remember the number of Mackenzie's, correct, with some of her friends. Do you remember these photographs? The court says, the Halloween ones. McDonald said, pardon? The court says, the Halloween ones. McDonald says, yes, the Halloween ones. Jesus says, yes. He says, do you know where those photographs were taken? He says, no. McDonald says, okay, you received information. Jesus says, yes. And you received information they were taken at OU. Jesus says, correct. On Halloween weekend, right? Jesus says, that's what was reported. So McDonald said, that was reported. You also testified a lot about what was reported. So feel comfortable continuing to do that. And of course, you talked with her father and found out that her father went down there with her and drove her down there, right? Jesus says, no, I did not. McDonald said, is there a reason that you didn't investigate that? Jesus says, investigate what? Your Honor, there was no crime. She wasn't. The court says, just answer his question. Jesus says, yes. Investigate what? McDonald said, so if there's no crime, why do we show those pictures? Jesus says, that's a question for Mr. Troops, sir. I'm not the lawyer. To make her look bad. To make her look bad. McDonald says, I'll ask you the question. Jesus says, okay. McDonald said, those photographs don't have anything to do with approving this particular charge in the particular hearing, right? Jesus says, I am the cop, not the lawyer, sir. Jesus says, oh no, you are a lawyer. Jesus says, no, I'm not a lawyer. McDonald says, and you're a cop and you're a witness and you provided those photographs to the prosecutor, right? Jesus says, I provided everything. McDonald says, yes or no, to the prosecutor. McDonald says, okay, so you collected those things. Jesus says, yes, they were sent to us by the public. So then is the public there testifying? McDonald says, by the public. Jesus says, okay, so I'll ask that question again. What is the significance of those 10 photographs from OU as it relates to this charge here? Jesus says, I cannot answer that. McDonald said, so therefore I will answer for you. They're of no value, right? Jesus says, I cannot agree. I cannot disagree. McDonald said, and then you talked about whether Mackenzie lived there or not at Christine Russo's house, but yet you don't remember testifying that Christine Russo even did Mackenzie's laundry. Jesus says, yeah. McDonald said, okay, so she lived there, right? Can we just agree on that? Yes or no? Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, thank you. Mackenzie, in fact, allowed you to take her cell phone right away, right? Jesus says, from where? McDonald says, you asked her for the cell phone. Jesus says, no. And then it's inaudible. McDonald says, and she gave you the passcode. Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, she cooperated, right? Jesus said, that is correct. McDonald said, and when you went to talk with her at the hospital the first time, the information you had was she was driving a car where 2 people were killed. Jesus says, yes. McDonald said, she had to be a potential suspect of something, correct? Jesus said, yes. So to be fair to her, when did you read her rights? Jesus said, she was not in custody. McDonald said, my question was, to be fair to her, when did you read her rights? Jesus says, I didn't. McDonald says, you didn't. And were her parents there? Jesus says, her mom was, yes. McDonald says, what was the significance of her mother saying, we don't want to talk about it? Jesus says, I asked when she gets released if she would give a statement, and mom said, we're going to talk to a lawyer, and I gave her my card and said, we're not here to talk to her. McDonald says, okay. Jesus said, here's my card introducing myself. Here's my card. Have your lawyers give me a call. McDonald said, so again, what you testified was of no significance to this particular case. Jesus says, I answered questions. I'm not, and then it's inaudible. Well, you're sure not answering mine. Jesus says, I answered Mr. Troop's questions. McDonald said, why not mine? Jesus says, I'm answering yours. McDonald said, no, you're not. I said, what was the significance of what her mother said and why was that introduced as evidence? Jesus said, to me, it raised suspicion, not the fact that she didn't want to talk without a lawyer. The first concern was that she was more concerned about her social media just got me. Wait, what? Not the fact that she didn't want to talk without a lawyer. The first concern was she was more concerned about social media just got me. I paused. It's not normal reaction that I see from people when I investigate crashes, including fatal crashes, where people are more than happy to try to clarify some things. Hey, this happened. My bad. I'm sorry. Something. She gave us nothing. And the first thing is she's worried about the public reaction, followed by multiple phone calls about people making mean comments. But Kenzie did. You heard it from the hospital employees. She was feeling remorseful and said stuff like, I don't want to live anymore. I just unalived my two friends. She was having a mental break in the hospital, which was why the police were called in there in the first place. McDonald said, so we're going to agree you don't take this as a suicide attempt on Mackenzie's part. Is that correct? Troop says, objection. The court says overruled. He says, every avenue we took, every leaf we flipped led me to one conclusion, that it was an intentional act. This car was intentionally pedal to the metal driven into the building. McDonald said, in spite of everything else we talked about, that's your conclusion? Jesus said, that's my conclusion. McDonald said, now will you answer my question? Jesus said, yes. McDonald says, was she attempting to unalive herself? Yes or no? Jesus says, I don't know. McDonald says, you don't know. You're just going to leave it there, right? Jesus says, I don't know if she was homicidal or S-word. I don't know. McDonald says, you don't know? Okay. Jesus says, I know that the car was purposely driven into the wall at almost 100 miles an hour. No braking, pedal to the metal. Do you know who turned the wheel? He says, it doesn't matter. The speed is what caused the high velocity impact into the wall. It wasn't the maneuvering. No, it does matter. It does matter. And the fact that she hydroplaned also matters as well. The fact that she hit the curb also matters as well. The fact that there was a rollover incident that could have deployed airbags also matters. Like McDonald says, how many people speed down that road? Be honest with me. Jesus says, I don't run radar down there. I never ran radar down there, actually. McDonald says, do you work for Strongsville? He says, I do. McDonald said, you don't know? He says, I don't know. McDonald said, that's a cut through. People speed all the time. Will you at least acknowledge that? Jesus says, I will not acknowledge that. That's a business area. It's a bumpy road. It's not the kind of place. There's a gym right there. I can't tell you. People speed, but I can't tell you if they speed all the time. I worked the northeast corner of the city of Strongsville for 8 or 9 of my 10 years. That is not my sector. I worked at Webster Whitney area. That's where I ran my radar. That's where I made my traffic stops. McDonald says, could I have a moment, Your Honor? The court says, yes. McDonald says, no further questions. The court says, do you need a break? He says, yes, please, I need a break. The courtroom says, we're going to take a 5-minute recess. I will remind you that you are under oath. Okay, you are not to have a conversation. And then there's a redirect examination, but we're going to end it there for today. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I'm shook. I'm shook. I'm shook. I'm shook. I'm shook. Nope. It smells fucking fishy. I don't know. I don't know. I do not want that coming from anyone's mouth when I'm being convicted of life in prison. Miscarriage of justice, says Abuelita. And we see that happen all the time, don't we, Abuelita? A lot of speculation. How the hell did this ever get out of juvie court? And if people want to hate me for thinking that, more than ever, I think now I shouldn't have. I'm shook. I'm shook. I'm shook. I'm shook. And we will continue reading this more. I might do another members only tomorrow. I think we have a lot of stuff to talk about aside from the transcripts and the documents. I had so much fun in the last members only. You guys are the best. Great read, Melly. That was a very good information document. I have so much to say, but let me gather my thoughts. Let me gather my notes. Let me get some more documents. I don't want to address the drama that could have been here in the chat. If you guys saw that, you know why. I will address that on a later live. Shout out to everyone who is here, showing up and supporting, having an open mind, being hella cool, being respectful. I appreciate it so much. Thank you again to everyone who gifted, Juvenated, Killer, Patterns, Barbara for becoming a member, Sarah and Evie. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I love you guys for supporting. I love you guys for watching and viewing. And please hit the like button on your way out, whether you like what I'm saying or not. I'm just reading to you the documents, and that's all you need to worry about. My opinion is just my opinion. We don't have to agree. And I respect you guys for that. And so when you see people trashing me in comments, just remember, you can't believe that, because I think I have been pretty fair with reading the documents and getting facts out there. This is all crazy. Wowzers. Wowzers is right. Anyways, RIP Dom and Davion. Keep your eye on the lookout for either a later live. I did have Taylor Parker live for today, but if I don't get to it today, we can get to it tomorrow. And we will be continuing Kenzie for sure. Transcripts. Let me find my favorite song. I don't know where I left it. I'll have to like download that. You guys know what song I'm talking about. Yeah, I have it somewhere in here because I was gonna make it my ringtone. Respectfully. Oh, here we go.
I'm a buff baby that can dance like a man. I can shake a my fanny, I can shake a my can. I'm tough tootin' baby, I can punch your buns. Punch your buns, I can punch all your buns. If you're an evil witch, I will punch you for fun.
Hey, Lintonero, we'll talk later. Hit me up. I did not participate in the chat anymore. Okay, hoodies. Well, you know I love you, hoodies. I appreciate you. Anyways, please hit the like button on the way out. Haters, please hit the like button too. Just cut it out. Boo Boo Kitty, I'll catch you later. Laura, I'll catch you later. Thank you everyone for being here. RIP Dom and Davion. I'll see you guys on the next live.